The moment Evan Pierce pulled that 7-year-old boy from the raging floodwater on Maple Avenue, he had no idea he was saving the son of the woman who once destroyed his career. Claire Dalton, his former boss, the architect of his downfall, would come running through that storm barefoot and desperate, only to freeze when she recognized the man holding her child. 5 years of silence, one flooded street, and a secret that had been drowning them both. Stay with me until the end of this story and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The rain didn't start as rain. It started as a whisper. A few drops tapping against Evan Pierce's windshield as he merged onto Highway 47, his delivery truck loaded with 73 packages that needed to be delivered before nightfall. The sky had been threatening all afternoon, that peculiar greenish gray that made people in the Midwest check their weather apps and text their kids to come home early. But Evan had learned not to worry about things he couldn't control. Weather was weather. Bills were bills. And his daughter Mira's school registration fee was due in 3 days. So he drove. The whisper became a murmur around 4:15 p.m., right as he was dropping off a box of organic dog food to a house on Pinewood Lane. By 4:30, as he climbed back into his truck, it had escalated into a full-throated roar. Rain hammered down in sheets so thick he could barely see 10 feet ahead. His phone buzzed. A weather alert he dismissed without reading. He'd driven through worse. At least he told himself he had. What Evan Pierce didn't know, couldn't know, was that 3 miles northeast, the Coldwater Creek retention system had just failed. 40 years of deferred infrastructure maintenance had finally caught up with the city. Within minutes, millions of gallons of water would overwhelm the drainage systems, turning streets into rivers and intersections into drowning pools. And by pure chance, or perhaps something that felt uncomfortably like fate, Evan's route would take him directly through the worst of it. He'd been a delivery driver for 4 years, 3 months, and 16 days. Not that he was counting. Before that, he'd been a project manager at Dalton & Moore Architects, one of the most prestigious firms in the city. He'd had an office with windows that overlooked the river. He'd had business cards with embossed lettering. He'd had a future that felt solid, the kind that let you sleep at night without calculating whether you could afford both electricity and groceries. Then he'd had nothing. The memory still came at him sometimes when he wasn't prepared for it. Claire Dalton's face across her mahogany desk, the way she couldn't quite meet his eyes as she slid the severance paperwork toward him. "It's not personal, Evan. The firm is restructuring. We have to make cuts." Her voice had been so carefully neutral, so professionally distant, that he'd almost believed she felt nothing. Almost. He'd wanted to tell her the truth that day. Wanted to explain that the mistake that had nearly cost the firm the Riverside Plaza project, the one that made him such an easy target for layoffs, hadn't been his mistake at all. But he'd looked at her pale face, at the shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide, and he'd kept his mouth shut. Some secrets were heavier than others. Some debts couldn't be repaid with words. So he'd signed the papers, packed his desk into a cardboard box that had once held reams of printer paper, and walked out of that building for the last time. His wife had left 6 months later. "I didn't sign up for this," she'd said, gesturing vaguely at their suddenly smaller apartment, at his delivery uniform hanging by the door, at the life that had shrunk to fit their diminished circumstances. She'd taken the car, half the furniture, and her absence, though painful, had felt almost like relief. Mira, his 8-year-old daughter, had been the one good thing he'd managed not to break. She didn't care that they'd moved to a 2-bedroom apartment in a building where the elevator worked maybe half the time. She didn't complain when dinner was pasta 4 nights a week. She just hugged him extra tight on the nights when she sensed his exhaustion went deeper than tired muscles, and she drew him pictures that he taped to every available wall, explosions of color that made their small space feel less like failure. The rain was getting worse. Evan leaned forward, squinting through the windshield as his wipers worked frantically, achieving almost nothing. Water sluiced across the road in patterns that made him nervous, not the normal flow toward storm drains, but something more chaotic. Cross currents. He'd lived in this city his whole life, had driven these streets thousands of times, but the water was transforming everything into unfamiliar territory. He turned onto Maple Avenue because it was the next address on his route, a birthday present for someone named Jennifer Kovach, priority delivery, signature required. The street was tree-lined and usually quiet, the kind of neighborhood where people still knew their neighbors' names and kept their lawns obsessively maintained. But today it looked like a special effect from a disaster movie. Water rushed down both sides of the street in churning currents that had already swallowed the curbs and were creeping toward the houses. A trash can tumbled past like it weighed nothing. Papers and leaves and things Evan couldn't identify swirled in muddy whirlpools around the storm drains that had clearly given up even pretending to function. He should turn around. He knew he should turn around, but the Kovacs house was right there, number 847, third house on the left. And if he turned around now, he'd have to come back tomorrow, which would throw off his whole schedule, which would mean angry calls from the dispatch office, which would mean he was so tired of the cascade of small failures that seemed to define his life now. Evan put the truck in low gear and eased forward. The water was deeper than it looked. He felt it grab at his tires, felt the vehicle want to drift sideways. His hands tightened on the wheel. Just get to the house, drop the package, get out. Simple. He was halfway down the block when he saw the boy. At first it was just movement in his peripheral vision, something small and wrong in a landscape that was already all wrong. His brain took a second to process what his eyes were seeing. A child, maybe 7 years old, wearing a red raincoat that had come unzipped and was billowing behind him like a broken wing. The kid was in the water, in the street, being pushed by the current toward the intersection where Maple met Roosevelt Avenue, where the water was even deeper, where the current was even stronger. Time did that strange thing it sometimes does in crisis moments. It didn't slow down exactly, but it seemed to separate into distinct units, each one crystal clear and impossibly sharp. Evan saw the boy's face, white with fear and cold, saw his mouth open in a cry that was swallowed by the storm, saw the exact moment when the child lost his footing and went under. Evan didn't remember making the decision to stop the truck, didn't remember opening the door or jumping out into water that hit him mid-thigh, and immediately tried to knock him over. The cold was shocking, even though he'd expected it. That bone-deep cold that makes your muscles seize and your breath come in gasps. The current was stronger than it looked from inside the truck. Much stronger. It pushed at him with aggressive insistence, wanting to drag him along with all the other debris it had claimed. Evan planted his feet wide, feeling for solid ground beneath the rushing water, and pushed forward. "Hey!" he shouted, though he knew the boy couldn't hear him over the rain and his own panic. "Kid, hold on!" The boy's head surfaced 10 feet ahead, then went under again. Evan lunged forward, arms outstretched, his delivery uniform already soaked through and weighing him down. His foot hit something under the water, a curb maybe, or a piece of someone's fence that had torn loose, and he stumbled but caught himself. The water was up to his chest now. Every step was a negotiation with a force that wanted him to fall, to float, to give up and let it carry him wherever it was going. "I've got you," Evan gasped, even though he didn't, even though the boy was still out of reach. "I'm coming." His hand closed on fabric, the red raincoat, thank God for the red raincoat, and he pulled. The boy came up sputtering and coughing and trying to scream all at once. Evan got his other arm around the child's chest and lifted him up and out of the water, holding him against his shoulder the way he held Mira when she had nightmares. "You're okay?" Evan heard himself saying, the words coming automatically even though his heart was hammering and his legs were shaking from effort and cold. "I've got you. You're okay now." The boy clung to him, fingers digging into Evan's shoulders hard enough to bruise. He was crying and choking and shivering all at once. Evan turned, trying to orient himself, trying to figure out the safest path back to higher ground. The current fought him with every step. It wanted the boy back. It wanted them both. There. A blue sedan parked at an angle, its front tires up on someone's lawn, the hood still above the waterline. Evan aimed for it like it was home base, like it was the finish line, like it was the only thing in the world that mattered. His legs burned. His arms burned. The cut on his forearm, he didn't even remember getting cut, but blood was mixing with the dirty water, burned with a bright, sharp pain that felt almost clarifying. "Almost there," he panted into the boy's wet hair. "Just a little further, buddy. Just a little." His foot slipped. For one terrible second, they were both going under. Evan felt the water close over his head, felt the current grab at them with renewed hunger. Then his other foot found purchase, and he pushed up with everything he had left. They broke the surface together. The boy was screaming now, a high-pitched wail that somehow pierced through the storm's roar. 3 more steps. 2. 1. Evan's hand slapped against the sedan's hood, slick and solid and real. He shoved the boy up onto it, using the last of his strength to get the child completely out of the water. The boy scrambled backward until he was pressed against the windshield, still crying, but breathing, alive, safe. Evan clung to the side of the car, his legs shaking so badly he wasn't sure they'd support him if he tried to stand. Water rushed past his chest, pulling at him, whispering suggestions about how easy it would be to just let go. He pushed the thoughts away and focused on breathing. In and out, in and out. The boy was safe. That was what mattered. "Liam!" The voice cut through the storm like a knife, high and desperate, and so full of terror that Evan felt it in his own chest. He turned his head, water streaming down his face, and saw a woman running through the flood toward them. She was barefoot. That was the first thing he noticed, her feet bare and white against the dark water, her shoes apparently abandoned somewhere in her panic. She wore jeans and a white blouse that was plastered to her body by the rain. Her dark hair had come loose from whatever style she'd had it in and hung around her face in wet ropes. She ran with a kind of desperate grace, high-stepping through the current, her arms out for balance. "Liam!" she cried again, and the boy on the hood of the car responded, "Mom!" Evan watched her come, watched her fight the same water he'd just fought, watched her face transform from terror to relief as she saw her son alive and whole. She reached the car and grabbed the boy, pulling him down into her arms with a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She held him like she'd never let go, rocking him back and forth, pressing her face into his wet hair. "Thank God," she was saying, over and over. "Thank God, thank God, thank God." Then she looked up at Evan. The world stopped. It actually stopped. Or maybe it was just his heart that stopped, seizing in his chest as recognition hit them both at exactly the same moment. Her eyes went wide. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She was still holding her son, still kneeling in the water next to the car, but every other part of her had frozen. "Evan?" she whispered, and his name in her mouth felt like something forbidden, something they'd both agreed never to speak again. Claire Dalton, his former boss, the woman who'd fired him, the woman whose career he'd saved at the cost of his own. The woman he hadn't seen or spoken to in 5 years, 3 months, and 8 days. Not that he was counting. She looked different. Older, though not in a bad way. There were lines at the corners of her eyes that hadn't been there before, and she'd cut her hair shorter. But her eyes were the same, that particular shade of gray-green that had once made him stumble over his words in project meetings. They were wide now, shocked, staring at him like he was a ghost. "Claire," he managed, his voice rough from cold and exertion. They stared at each other across 3 feet of flooded street and 5 years of silence. The rain kept falling, the water kept rushing past, and Evan felt something in his chest that he thought he'd successfully buried come surging back to life. Anger and longing and a grief so profound it made the physical pain in his body feel like nothing. "You," Claire started, then stopped, started again. "You saved him. You saved Liam." Evan looked at the boy, at Liam, who was watching this exchange with the confused wariness of a child who knows something important is happening but doesn't understand what. He was maybe 7, with his mother's eyes and dark hair that curled when it was wet. 5 years ago, Claire had been pregnant. Evan remembered now, remembered the morning sickness she'd tried to hide during meetings, remembered the day she'd come back from a doctor's appointment, glowing with news she couldn't quite keep to herself. This was that baby. Grown now. Alive because Evan had happened to be driving down the street at exactly the right moment. Or exactly the wrong moment, depending on how you looked at it. "He was in the water," Evan said, as if this explained everything, as if it explained anything. "Thank you." Claire's voice broke on the words. "Thank you. I can't." She pulled her son closer, fresh tears mixing with the rain on her face. "He ran out. I was inside and I heard the water, and I came out, and he was just gone. He'd gone out to... I don't even know why. She was spiraling, panic and relief making her words tumble over each other. Evan had seen her like this exactly once before, the night she'd called him at 11 p.m. from her office, her voice shaking as she told him about the mistake she'd made on the Riverside Plaza calculations. The mistake that would cost the firm millions if anyone found out. The mistake that could end her career before it really started. The mistake he'd claimed as his own. "He's okay," Evan said quietly. "That's what matters." Sirens cut through the air, emergency services finally making their way into the flooded area. An ambulance appeared at the top of the street, its lights painting everything in alternating red and white. Behind it came a fire truck, and behind that, police cars. Claire stood up, still holding Liam, and Evan saw her legs shake. She was running on adrenaline, same as him, and it was going to run out soon. He pushed himself away from the car, his own legs barely supporting him, and started to back away. "Wait," Claire said. "Evan, wait!" "The paramedics can check him out," Evan said, still moving backward through the water. Away from her, away from this moment that felt too big, too complicated, too dangerous. Make sure he didn't inhale too much water. He should be fine, but you're bleeding. Evan glanced down at his arm. The cut was deeper than he'd thought, a ragged gash just below his elbow where something sharp had caught him. Blood ran down his forearm in pink streams, diluted by the rain and floodwater. It hurt now that he was paying attention to it. "It's fine," he said. "It's not fine. You need—" Claire shifted Liam to one hip, reaching toward Evan with her free hand. "Come with us. The ambulance can—" "No." The word came out harder than he'd meant it to. He saw her flinch and hated himself for it, but he didn't take it back. "I need to get back to my truck. I have deliveries." It was the stupidest thing he could have said. They both knew it. His truck was probably flooded by now anyway, half the packages ruined, his job probably forfeit. But he needed something to hold on to, some excuse to walk away from this woman and this moment, and the way she was looking at him like she was seeing him for the first time. "Evan, please!" The paramedics were calling out, asking if everyone was okay, starting to wade into the water toward them. Evan took advantage of the distraction to turn away, heading back toward where he'd left his truck. Every step sent pain shooting through his legs. His whole body was starting to shake as the adrenaline drained away and shock set in. "We need to talk," Claire called after him, her voice desperate. "Evan, we need to—" But he was already walking away, his shoulders hunched against the rain, his arms wrapped around himself as if he could hold his breaking pieces together through sheer force of will. Behind him, he heard Claire trying to explain something to the paramedics, heard Liam crying again, heard all of it fading as he put distance between them. His truck was where he'd left it, water up to the wheel wells now, the engine definitely dead. Evan stood in the rain and looked at this vehicle that represented 4 years of starting over, of swallowing his pride, of doing what needed to be done to take care of his daughter. It should have felt like disaster. It should have felt like one more thing breaking in a life that was held together with duct tape and determination. Instead, he felt nothing. Nothing but cold and pain and a strange, hollow emptiness where all his emotions should have been. A police officer appeared at his elbow. Sir, are you all right? Do you need medical attention?" Evan looked at him, young guy, maybe 25, with the earnest concern of someone who still believed he could help everyone. "I'm fine," Evan said automatically. Then, because he could see the officer looking at his arm, at the blood still flowing, "Just a cut. It looks worse than it is." "You should really let the paramedics—" "I said I'm fine." The officer's face shifted from concern to professional assessment. "Is this your vehicle, sir?" "Yeah." "I'm afraid you're going to need to have it towed. The street won't be clear for several hours, maybe not until tomorrow. Is there someone you can call?" Evan almost laughed. Someone he could call. Right. He pulled out his phone, waterlogged, screen flickering, probably dead within the hour, and stared at it. His contact list was depressingly short. Emergency contacts, Mira's school, his supervisor at work, the food delivery place they ordered from on Fridays when he was too exhausted to cook. "Yeah," he said, "I'll call someone." The officer nodded, already moving away to help with the next crisis. Everyone had somewhere to be, something urgent that needed handling. Evan stood in the rain next to his dead truck and tried to figure out what happened next. He needed to get home. Needed to check on Mira. She was with Mrs. Chen from downstairs, safe and warm, but she'd worry when he didn't show up on time. Needed to figure out how to explain to his supervisor why he'd abandoned an entire truck full of packages in the middle of a flood. Needed to forget the look on Claire Dalton's face when she'd recognized him. "Evan!" He turned, and there she was again, coming back through the water toward him. Someone had given her a blanket, red, emergency bright, that she'd wrapped around both herself and Liam. The boy was clinging to her, but he looked calmer now, the terror fading into exhaustion. "I told you," Evan started, but she cut him off. "I know what you told me, but you don't get to save my son's life and then just disappear. You don't—" Her voice caught. "Evan, please, 5 minutes. Just give me 5 minutes." He should say no. Every instinct he had told him to say no, to walk away, to protect himself from whatever was about to happen. But he was so tired. Tired of walking away, tired of protecting himself, tired of the careful distance he'd built between who he used to be and who he was now. 5 minutes, he heard himself say. Claire's shoulders sagged with relief. She adjusted her grip on Liam, who was watching Evan with that open curiosity children had before they learned to hide their interest. "Is that him?" the boy asked his mother in a whisper that wasn't really a whisper at all. "Is that the man who saved me?" "Yes, baby," Claire said softly. "That's him." They stood there in the middle of the flooded street, the three of them, while emergency vehicles moved around them and the rain began, finally, to ease up. Evan could see individual drops now, instead of just sheets of water. The storm was passing. It would all be over soon. "I didn't know you had a son," Evan said, which was a stupid thing to say because of course he hadn't known. They hadn't spoken in 5 years. She could have had 3 more children and a house full of foster dogs and a complete career change, and he wouldn't have known any of it. "He turned 7 in March," Claire said. She looked down at the boy, and something in her face softened. "He's everything." Evan understood that. Mira was everything to him too. The only thing that had made any of the last 5 years bearable. "You shouldn't be out here," Claire continued, looking at his arm again. "You're injured and you're going into shock. I live just 2 blocks from here. Come back to the house, at least until the water goes down. You can get warm, clean up that cut, and then—" "No." Evan shook his head. "I appreciate the offer, but it's not an offer. It's the least I can do after what you just did. Please, Evan, I'm not asking—" She stopped, started over. 5 years ago, I made a choice that I've regretted every single day since. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything. But I'm asking you to let me say thank you properly. That's all." Evan looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something in her eyes that made his chest ache. Guilt. Deep, corrosive guilt that he recognized because he'd been carrying his own version of it for just as long. She thought she'd destroyed his life, and maybe she had, though not in the way she believed. The truth was there between them, unspoken, heavy as the water that still rushed past their feet. He could tell her. Right now, right here, he could tell her what really happened with the Riverside Plaza project. Tell her that the mistake she thought she'd made hadn't been a mistake at all, that he'd found the real error in her calculations and fixed it before anyone else saw. Tell her that the mistake that got him fired had been his own fabrication, a deliberate fall on his sword so that she wouldn't take the blame for something that was really another senior partner's sloppy work. But looking at her exhausted face, at the way she held her son like he was the only thing keeping her tethered to the earth, Evan couldn't do it. Some secrets were meant to stay buried. Some sacrifices didn't need witnesses. 1 hour, he said finally. "I'll come dry off and let you patch up my arm. But then I need to get home to my daughter." Relief flooded Claire's face. "You have a daughter?" "I do. Mira, she's 8. "Then we'll make sure you get home to her." Claire shifted Liam again, turning toward the higher ground at the end of the street. "Come on, my house is this way." They walked together through the receding flood water, 3 people bound together by chance and crisis and the weight of things left unsaid. Evan kept his eyes forward, not looking at Claire, not letting himself wonder what happened next. 1 hour. He'd give her 1 hour, and then this strange, terrible day would be over. He didn't know, couldn't know, that this was just the beginning, that walking into Claire Dalton's house was going to change everything he thought he knew about the last 5 years, that some doors, once opened, couldn't be closed again. The rain had stopped completely by the time they reached her house, a two-story colonial with blue shutters and a porch that wrapped around the front. Water still covered the lawn, but the house itself sat high enough to have escaped the worst of the flooding. Claire led them up the porch steps, fishing keys from a pocket in her soaked jeans. "I know it's a mess," she said, pushing the door open. "We were in the middle of—" She stopped talking as they entered, and Evan saw why. The house was in chaos, not from the flood, but from life. Liam's toys were scattered across the living room floor. Dishes were piled in the sink, visible through the kitchen doorway. Papers covered the dining room table in precarious stacks. It was the kind of mess that spoke of someone too busy to keep up, too tired to care, too alone to have help. It looked like Evan's apartment. It looked like a single parent's home. "Where's your husband?" Evan asked, before he could think better of it. Claire's face did something complicated. "There isn't one. There never was." She set Liam down, keeping one hand on his shoulder. "Go change out of those wet clothes, baby. Put on something warm." "But Mom, now Liam—" The boy looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Claire's voice stopped him. He trudged toward the stairs, glancing back at Evan one more time before disappearing upward. They heard his feet on the stairs, then silence. Claire turned to Evan, and in the dim light of her living room, with wet hair and no makeup, and exhaustion written in every line of her body, she looked more real than he'd ever seen her. More human. Less like the polished executive who'd sat across from him in that mahogany-lined office, and more like someone who was just trying to survive one day at a time. "I should get you a towel," she said, "and the first aid kit. Sit. Anywhere is fine." She disappeared into another room, leaving Evan standing in her entryway, dripping on her hardwood floors, trying to figure out how his life had become so impossibly strange. 3 hours ago, he'd been worried about making his delivery quota. Now he was standing in his former boss's house, bleeding on her floor, trying not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. Claire came back with an armful of towels and a white plastic box with a red cross on it. "Bathroom's down the hall if you want to change, but I don't have anything that would fit you. I could throw your clothes in the dryer while we—" "This is fine," Evan said, taking one of the towels and rubbing it roughly over his hair. "Really? Your arm? I can do it." "Evan?" She set the first aid kit on the coffee table and fixed him with a look he remembered from 100 project meetings, the one that said she was done negotiating. "Sit down and let me help, please." So he sat, and she knelt beside him on the couch, carefully rolling up his soaked sleeve to expose the gash on his forearm. It was uglier than he'd thought, deep enough that it was probably going to need stitches, though he had no idea how he was going to afford an ER visit right now. "This needs more than just bandaging," Claire said quietly, echoing his thoughts. "You should go to the hospital." "Can't afford it." The words hung between them, simple and brutal. Claire's hand stilled on his arm. She didn't look up at him, but he saw her throat work as she swallowed. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Evan, I'm so—" "Don't." He pulled his arm back, started to stand up. "I told you I don't want—" "You took the fall for me." The words burst out of her like they'd been held back too long, under too much pressure. 5 years ago, the Riverside Plaza project. That wasn't your mistake. I know it wasn't. I've known for years, but I couldn't. Evan froze. The world tilted sideways. "How long have you known?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Claire finally looked up at him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Since about a month after you left. I found the original files, found the notes in your handwriting where you'd caught the real error. Marcus Chen's calculations were wrong, not mine. You fixed it, covered it up, and then when the firm needed someone to blame for the delayed timeline, you volunteered yourself. You let them think you were incompetent when really—" She stopped, pressing her hands against her eyes. "Why didn't you say anything?" Evan asked. "Why didn't you tell them the truth?" "Because by the time I figured it out, you were already gone. And Marcus Chen was a senior partner who could destroy my career with a word. I was pregnant, Evan, alone and pregnant and barely holding on to my job. I tried to find you, to explain to—" Her voice broke. "But you disappeared, changed your number. And I told myself you were probably fine, that you'd landed somewhere better, that you didn't want to hear from me anyway." Evan sat back down. His legs wouldn't hold him anymore. 5 years. She'd known for 5 years and said nothing. He'd been driving a delivery truck and eating ramen and watching his dreams evaporate while she'd known. "You should have told someone," he said. "I know." "You should have made it right." "I know." Tears were sliding down her face now. "But I was scared, and I was alone, and I chose wrong. I've been choosing wrong for 5 years, and then today—" She gestured helplessly at nothing. "Today you saved my son's life. You saved Liam. And I realize that you've been saving me all along, even after everything I—" "Stop." Evan couldn't listen to anymore, couldn't process the tangle of emotions rising in his chest, anger and vindication, and something that felt uncomfortably like relief. He'd carried that secret for so long, had convinced himself it didn't matter anymore, that the past was dead and buried. But Claire had known, had carried her own guilt. They'd both been drowning for 5 years, just in different waters. They sat in silence, the only sound their breathing and the faint drip of water from their soaked clothes. Outside, the emergency sirens had faded. The storm was over. But inside this living room, in the space between two people who'd once known each other professionally and now didn't know each other at all, the real storm was just beginning. "I run the firm now," Claire said finally, her voice steadier. "Marcus Chen retired 2 years ago. I bought out his shares. Dalton and Moore is mine now, and we're doing well. Better than well. And I've spent 5 years building something that should have had your name on it too." Evan looked at her, at this woman who'd been his boss and his secret keeper and his ghost. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to come back," she said simply. "Come back to the firm. Not as a project manager, as a partner. Equal shares, equal say. It's the least I can do to begin to make this right." The words didn't make sense. Evan heard them, processed them individually, but strung together they were just noise. "Come back, partner. Make it right." "You're in shock," he said. "Your son almost died. You're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years." Claire reached for his hand and he let her take it, too stunned to pull away. "Evan Pierce, you saved my son's life today, but 5 years ago you saved mine. Let me return the favor, please." Evan looked at their hands, his rough and scarred from years of manual labor, hers still elegant despite being soaked and cold. He thought about Mira, about the school registration fee he couldn't quite afford, about the truck sitting dead in the middle of Maple Avenue, about the life he'd built from the wreckage of his old one, the life that was always one crisis away from complete collapse. He thought about drawing late at night after Mira was asleep, architectural sketches he'd never show anyone, dreams he'd carefully filed away in the drawer labeled impossible. "I need to think about it," he said. Claire nodded, not pushing, not arguing. "Of course. Take all the time you need, but Evan, I meant what I said. This isn't charity. The firm needs someone like you. I need someone like you. Someone who—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Someone who knows what it means to do the right thing even when it costs everything." Upstairs, they heard Liam moving around in his room, the ordinary sounds of a child getting ready for bed, drawers opening, water running, life continuing despite the crisis, despite everything. That was what parents did, Evan thought. They kept life continuing no matter what. "I should go," he said, standing up. His arm throbbed, his clothes were still soaked, and he had no idea how he was going to get home, but staying here felt dangerous in a way he couldn't quite articulate. "Let me call you a car," Claire said, already pulling out her phone. "And give me your number, please. Even if you decide you never want to hear from me again, at least let me know you got home safely." So he gave her his number, this woman from his past who'd suddenly crashed back into his present, and he stood in her doorway while she called a rideshare, and he didn't look at her because if he looked at her he might say something stupid, might agree to something he'd regret. 3 minutes, Claire said, checking her phone. "The driver will be here in 3 minutes." Evan nodded. 3 minutes. He could survive 3 minutes of awkward silence. "For what it's worth," Claire said quietly, "I really am sorry. For all of it. For being too much of a coward to speak up when it mattered. For letting you take the fall. For—" She stopped, started over. "I was so focused on protecting myself that I didn't think about what it cost you. That was wrong. There's no excuse for it. You had a baby on the way. Evan said, surprising himself. You did what you thought you had to do. I get it. That doesn't make it right. No, he agreed. It doesn't. A car pulled up outside, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Evan's ride. His escape. Thank you again, Claire said. For Liam. For everything. Evan opened the door, stepped out into air that smelled like rain and mud and new beginnings, whether he wanted them or not. He turned back to look at her one last time. This woman who'd been so many things to him, who'd shaped his life in ways she couldn't possibly understand. I'll think about it, he said. The job. I'll think about it. Hope flared in Claire's eyes. That's all I'm asking. He walked to the car, got in, gave the driver his address. As they pulled away, he looked back at Claire's house, at the light spilling from the open door, at her silhouette framed in the doorway watching him go. And he wondered if maybe, just maybe, the flood had washed away more than just streets and storm drains. Maybe it had washed away the distance between two people who'd lost their way. Maybe it had cleared a path forward that neither of them could see yet. Or maybe he was just exhausted and bleeding and letting hope get the better of his common sense. The car turned the corner and Claire's house disappeared from view. Evan leaned his head against the window and closed his eyes. Tomorrow he'd wake up and deal with the consequences. The lost job, the destroyed truck, the impossible decision Claire had dropped in his lap. Tomorrow he'd figure out how to explain all this to Mira. But tonight, for just a few more minutes, he let himself exist in the space between the disaster and whatever came next. The space where anything still felt possible. Where second chances weren't just cruel jokes. Where a single dad who'd lost everything might still have a chance to find his way home. The apartment was dark when Evan finally made it home, except for the flickering blue light of the television in the living room. He pushed through the door, his wet clothes leaving a trail of water across the cheap linoleum, and found Mrs. Chen asleep on the couch with Mira curled against her side. They were watching some animated movie Evan didn't recognize, the volume turned low enough that it was just a murmur beneath the sound of Mrs. Chen's soft snoring. Mira's eyes opened first. She sat up slowly, careful not to disturb their neighbor, and her face went from sleepy to alarmed in the space of a heartbeat. Dad? Her voice was small and scared. What happened to you? Evan looked down at himself, still soaked, his sleeve torn and bloody despite the hasty bandaging Claire had managed before the car arrived, mud streaked across his jeans. He must look like he'd been in a war zone, which, in a way, he had been. I'm okay, baby, he said quietly, moving to the couch and kneeling beside her so they were at eye level. There was flooding downtown. I had to help someone, but I'm fine, just wet and tired. Mrs. Chen stirred, her eyes opening in that sudden, complete way elderly people seem to master, 0 to fully alert in half a second. She took one look at Evan and made a soft sound of distress. Evan, you're hurt. What happened? Should I call? It's okay, Mrs. Chen, really. I just need to get cleaned up. Evan touched her arm gently, grateful as always for this 72-year-old woman who'd become their emergency contact, their backup parent, their safety net. Thank you for staying with Mira. I'm sorry I was so late. Late? Mrs. Chen waved this away like it was nothing, though Evan knew she had her own grandchildren to worry about, her own life to live. You think I worried about late? I worried about dead. The news, they showed the flooding, cars underwater, people trapped. I thought maybe you were... She stopped herself, glancing at Mira. But you're here now. That's what matters. Evan helped her gather her things, her knitting bag, her phone, her reading glasses that were always mysteriously lost and found. He walked her to the door, pressed 2 20s into her hand despite her protests, and promised he'd check in tomorrow to let her know he was really okay. Then it was just him and Mira in their small apartment, the silence heavy between them. You're bleeding, Mira said, her voice very small and very careful. She used that voice when she was trying to be brave, trying not to cry, trying to be older than 8 years old should require. Just a cut. It looks worse than it is. Evan sat down on the couch, and Mira immediately climbed into his lap, not caring that his clothes were wet and dirty. She wrapped her arms around his neck and pressed her face against his shoulder, and he felt her shake with the tears she'd been holding back. I thought something bad happened, she whispered into his shirt. Mrs. Chen kept saying you were fine, but the TV showed all that water and those cars, and I thought, hey, hey, look at me. Evan pulled back enough to cup her face in his hands, wiping away tears with his thumbs. I'm here. I'm okay. Nothing bad happened to me, I promise. But your arm is just a scratch. I've had worse from when you convinced me to learn to skateboard with you. Remember? He smiled, trying to coax one from her. Remember how I fell and scraped up my whole side? Mira managed a watery giggle. You were really bad at skateboarding. The worst, Evan agreed. Absolutely terrible. You're much better at pretty much everything than I am. This earned him a real smile, small but genuine. Mira leaned back against him, her head tucked under his chin, her breathing starting to even out. They sat like that for a long moment, just breathing together, being alive together, being okay together. Dad? Mira's voice was muffled against his chest. Did you really save someone? Evan thought about Liam, about those terrifying seconds when he wasn't sure he'd reach the boy in time, about the weight of a child in his arms, the desperate strength it took to fight the current, about Claire's face when she'd recognized him. Yeah, he said softly. I did. A little boy, about your age. He was in the floodwater and I pulled him out. Mira sat up to look at him, her eyes wide. Like a hero? No, baby, not like a hero, just like... Evan searched for the words. Just like what anyone would do. He needed help, and I was there, so I helped. That's what heroes do, Mira insisted with the absolute certainty of childhood. They help people who need it. That makes you a hero. Evan's chest ached. If only it were that simple. If only helping people automatically made you heroic instead of just tired and broke and bleeding on your couch. Come on, he said, lifting her off his lap and standing up with a groan that made everything hurt. You need to get to bed. School tomorrow. But Dad, it's only 8:30, and you have that math test you've been studying for. You need sleep. He guided her toward her bedroom, the smaller of the apartment's 2 rooms, the one whose walls were covered in her drawings and paintings and the glow-in-the-dark stars they'd put up together last summer. Brush your teeth. I'll come tuck you in after I change. Mira looked like she wanted to argue, but something in his face must have told her this wasn't the time. She trudged toward the bathroom, glancing back at him twice like she was afraid he might disappear if she looked away too long. Evan waited until he heard the water running, then made his way to his own room. It was barely big enough for a bed and a dresser, with a closet that was more of a suggestion than actual storage space. But it was his, and it was dry, and right now that felt like enough. He peeled off his wet clothes, dropping them in a soggy pile that he'd deal with later. The cut on his arm had started bleeding again, seeping through Claire's makeshift bandaging. He should probably go to urgent care, get stitches, make sure it didn't get infected. Should probably do a lot of things. Instead, he found a clean t-shirt and sweatpants, wrapped his arm in gauze from the bathroom cabinet, and tried not to think about anything at all. His phone buzzed. For one disorienting second, he thought it might be his supervisor calling to fire him, or the towing company with a bill he couldn't pay, or any of the dozen small disasters that made up his life. But the number was unknown. The message was short. It's Claire. Just making sure you got home safely. Please let me know you're okay. Evan stared at the words, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. The smart thing would be to ignore it, to delete her number, block it if necessary, and pretend today had never happened. The smart thing would be to protect himself from whatever complicated mess was waiting to unfold between them. Home safe. Thanks for the ride. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. 3 dots appeared immediately, dancing on his screen. She was typing. He watched those dots like they might tell him the future. Thank God. I was worried. How's your arm? Fine. Another pause, more dots, then, I meant what I said. About the job. About making things right. No pressure, but the offer stands. Think about it. Evan closed his eyes. Think about it. As if he'd be able to think about anything else. I will, he typed back. Then because something in him needed to say it. Your son is a good kid. You should be proud. I am, and he's alive because of you. I won't forget that. We won't forget that. Evan turned off his phone before she could send anything else. He couldn't do this right now, couldn't navigate the minefield of their shared history, while his body was still shaking with exhaustion and his mind was replaying those moments in the flood on an endless loop. "Dad?" Mira's voice from the doorway. She was in her pajamas, her hair still damp from washing her face, her favorite stuffed elephant tucked under her arm. "I'm ready for bed." Evan followed her to her room, tucked her in under her comforter with the stars and moons pattern they'd picked out together at the thrift store. He sat on the edge of her bed, smoothing her hair back from her forehead the way he'd done every night since she was a baby. "You know I love you, right?" he said quietly. "More than anything in the whole world?" Mira nodded, her eyes already heavy with sleep. "I love you too, Dad, even when you're bad at skateboarding." He laughed, kissed her forehead, and stood to leave. But her hand caught his wrist, stopping him. "Dad? The boy you saved. Do you think you'll see him again?" Evan thought about Claire's offer, about partnership and second chances and doors that might be opening after 5 years of being slammed shut. "I don't know, baby. Maybe. We'll see." "I hope you do," Mira murmured, her eyes closing. "I think it would be nice for him to say thank you properly. That's what Mrs. Chen says. You should always say thank you properly when someone helps you." "Mrs. Chen is a wise woman." "The wisest," Mira agreed, and then she was asleep, just like that, the way children could switch off and trust the world to still be there when they woke up. Evan stood in her doorway for a long moment, watching her breathe, grateful beyond words that she was safe and loved and sleeping in a bed that was hers. Whatever else he'd failed at, he'd managed this. He'd kept her whole. His phone buzzed again in his pocket. Against his better judgment, he checked it. "I know I said no pressure, but I should mention we're having a company meeting Monday morning. Nothing formal, just a team breakfast to discuss the new downtown development project. If you wanted to come to see the office, to see what we've built, you'd be welcome. No strings attached, just breakfast and a conversation." Evan read the message 3 times. A company meeting, Monday morning, 3 days from now. He had 3 days to decide if he was brave enough or stupid enough or desperate enough to walk back into that building, into that life, into the wreckage of everything he'd left behind. He typed and deleted 4 different responses before settling on. "I'll think about it." Claire's response was immediate. "That's all I can ask. Sleep well, Evan, and thank you again for everything." He turned off his phone for real this time, plugging it in to charge in the kitchen where he wouldn't be tempted to check it every 5 minutes. Then he collapsed onto his own bed, still dressed in his t-shirt and sweatpants, too exhausted to even pull the covers up. Sleep should have come immediately. His body was screaming for it, every muscle aching, his mind foggy with fatigue. But instead he lay there in the dark, staring at the water-stained ceiling, and thought about everything he'd lost 5 years ago. The job had been the obvious part. The salary, the benefits, the career trajectory that had seemed so solid. But there had been more. There had been the respect that came with being good at something, with being recognized for your skills. There had been the satisfaction of seeing buildings rise from blueprints, of watching something you'd designed become real and solid and permanent. There had been the person he'd been before everything fell apart, confident, competent, certain of his place in the world. That person felt like a stranger now. Evan had built a different life in the ruins of the old one, a smaller life, a harder life, but one that was his. He'd learned to be satisfied with less, learned to measure success in whether Mira had enough to eat and whether the rent was paid on time, learned to find dignity in work that others looked down on, learned to hold his head high even when he was wearing a uniform and taking orders from kids half his age. Going back, if he went back, would mean risking all of that hard-won peace, would mean opening himself up to hope again, which was the most dangerous thing he could think of. Because hope made you vulnerable. Hope gave you something to lose. But God, he was tired of being safe, tired of playing defense, of just trying to survive. Tired of watching Mira draw beautiful buildings and knowing she got that gift from him, knowing he used to create things that mattered before he gave it all up. His phone buzzed one more time from the kitchen. Evan groaned, hauled himself out of bed, and went to check it. If this was Claire again, he was going to... But it wasn't Claire, it was his supervisor. "Heard about the truck. Need you to come in tomorrow to discuss what happens next. 9 a.m. Don't be late." Evan's stomach dropped. Right, the truck. The abandoned deliveries, the day that was going to cost him this job too, because apparently he couldn't keep anything good in his life for more than a few years at a time. He didn't respond to the message. What was there to say? He'd show up tomorrow morning, take whatever consequences were coming, and figure out the next move. That's what he always did. He improvised, adapted, survived, but as he climbed back into bed, as exhaustion finally started to pull him under, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered, "What if you didn't have to just survive? What if you could actually live again?" He pushed the thought away. Dangerous. Too dangerous. He couldn't afford thoughts like that, but they came anyway, as sleep finally claimed him, pulling him down into dreams of floodwater and second chances and a woman's face framed in a doorway, watching him leave but somehow still calling him home. Morning came too fast and too bright. Evan's alarm went off at 7, and every part of his body screamed in protest as he forced himself out of bed. His arm throbbed, his legs ached, and his head felt like someone had stuffed it with cotton wool. He shuffled to the bathroom, caught sight of himself in the mirror, and winced. He looked like hell, pale, exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes, and the kind of tension in his jaw that said he'd been grinding his teeth all night. The cut on his arm looked worse in daylight. Angry red edges, puffy with inflammation, definitely infected or about to be. He should have gone to urgent care. Should have let Claire talk him into letting the paramedics look at it. Should have done a lot of things. He rewrapped it as best he could, swallowed 3 ibuprofen with water from the tap, and went to wake Mira. She was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal and her math textbook open in front of her. She looked up when he entered, and her expression went from concentration to concern in an instant. "You look terrible," she announced with the brutal honesty of children everywhere. "Good morning to you too, sunshine." Evan poured himself coffee from the pot Mrs. Chen must have set up before she left last night. Bless that woman. Bless her and all her grandchildren and her entire family tree. "I'm serious, Dad. You look sick. Are you sure you're okay?" "Just tired, and I have to go into work this morning for a meeting." He didn't mention that the meeting was probably going to end with him being fired. No point worrying her before it happened. "Mrs. Chen is going to take you to school, okay?" Mira's face fell. "But you always take me on Fridays." Friday. Right. Their thing. Breakfast at the diner 2 blocks from her school, then the walk together, his one morning a week where he got to pretend he was a normal parent with a normal schedule. And he was about to blow it for a meeting where his boss would tell him what he already knew. "I know, baby, I'm sorry, but this is important. We'll do breakfast tomorrow instead, okay? Saturday morning, just you and me, pancakes and everything." Mira nodded, but he could see the disappointment in her eyes, could feel the weight of one more small failure added to the pile. He was so tired of disappointing her, so tired of everything being hard. The meeting with his supervisor went exactly as expected. Frank Dominguez sat behind his cluttered desk in an office that smelled like stale coffee and cigarettes, and he didn't waste time with pleasantries. "The truck's totaled," he said, pulling up photos on his computer and spinning the monitor so Evan could see. Water damage to the engine, interior destroyed, and 73 packages either damaged or missing. That's about $12,000 in losses, Pierce. Evan's chest tightened. 12,000. He'd known it was bad, but seeing the number made it real, made it catastrophic. "I know," he said quietly. "I'm sorry. The flooding happened so fast and there was a kid in the water. Yeah, I heard about your hero moment." Frank's voice wasn't unkind, just tired, just done. "And look, I get it. You did what you had to do, but the company's policy is clear. You're responsible for the vehicle and its contents. They're going to want to recoup the losses." "I don't have $12,000. "Nobody has $12,000, Pierce. That's not the point. The point is—" Frank sighed, rubbing his face. "Look, I went to bat for you, told them about the kid, about the circumstances. Best I could do was get them to agree not to press charges if you resign. Clean break, no lawsuits, no debt collection. You walk away and they eat the loss as part of the storm damage insurance claim." Evan had known this was coming, but hearing it still felt like a punch to the gut. Resign, walk away, start over again, for what felt like the 100th time. "When?" he asked. "They want a letter by end of business today." "I'm sorry, man, really." You were a good driver, never missed a day, never complained, always made your numbers. But corporate doesn't care about any of that. They just see the dollar signs. Evan nodded, stood up, shook Frank's hand even though the gesture felt hollow. Thanks for trying. What are you going to do? Frank asked as Evan reached the door. Evan thought about Claire's message, about the company meeting on Monday morning, about doors that might be opening just as this one slammed shut, about second chances and whether he was brave enough to reach for one. I don't know yet, he said honestly, but I'll figure it out. I always do. Outside, the day was bright and clear, the kind of perfect autumn morning that felt like mockery after the previous night's storm. The streets were still littered with debris, branches and trash and the detritus of broken lives scattered across the sidewalk. City workers were out with their trucks, cleaning up, making everything look normal again. Like the flood had never happened, like people's lives hadn't been turned upside down in the space of a few hours. Evan walked without direction, just needing to move, needing to think. His phone was heavy in his pocket. He could call Claire right now. Could tell her yes, he'd come to the meeting Monday. Could let her give him back everything he'd lost 5 years ago. But what if it didn't work out? What if he walked back into that world and failed again? What if he wasn't good enough anymore? Wasn't sharp enough? Had been away too long? He'd have given up what little stability he had left for a chance that might crumble the moment he touched it. His phone rang, making him jump. Unknown number but local area code. He answered warily. Mr. Pierce, this is Karen Mitchell from Riverside Elementary. I'm calling about Mira. Evan's heart stopped. Is she okay? What happened? She's fine, the woman said quickly. But we had a small incident in class this morning. She got upset during a test. Apparently she was worried about you after yesterday's flooding. Her teacher says she started crying and couldn't calm down. We tried to reach you, but I'll be right there, Evan said, already turning to head toward the school. 10 minutes. Tell her I'm coming. He made it in 8, jogging the last 3 blocks because his truck was gone and the bus would take too long. The school secretary gave him a visitor's pass and directed him to the nurse's office, where Mira sat on the examination table, her face blotchy from crying, her hands twisted in her lap. Dad! She launched herself at him, and he caught her, held her, felt her shake against his chest. I'm here, baby. I'm here. What's wrong? I couldn't, Mira hiccuped, trying to get the words out. I couldn't stop thinking about you in the water yesterday, and then the test had a word problem about flooding, and I got scared. What if something had happened to you? What if you'd... Hey, look at me. Evan pulled back, cupping her face like he had last night. Nothing happened to me. I'm fine. I'm right here. But you could have died, Mira whispered. You could have died saving that boy, and then I'd be alone, and I can't. Evan's heart broke. He'd been so focused on hiding his own stress, his own fears, that he hadn't thought about what yesterday had looked like from her perspective. His 8-year-old daughter had watched the news, seen the flooding, spent hours not knowing if her father was alive or dead. And then he'd come home looking like he'd been in a war, bleeding and exhausted, and expected her to just accept his reassurances and go to sleep. I'm sorry, he said softly. I should have talked to you more last night. Should have explained better. You're right, baby. It was dangerous. And I was scared too. But I'm okay. We're okay. Promise? Mira's voice was so small. I promise. Evan hugged her tight. And hey, guess what? I don't have to go back to work today. The meeting ended early, so I'm taking you out of school, and we're going to spend the whole day together. Just us. Anything you want to do. Mira pulled back, her eyes wide. Really? We can leave school? Really? I'll sign you out right now. Where do you want to go? She thought about it, wiping her eyes. The art museum? Of course, the art museum, where they had free admission on Fridays, and Mira could spend hours looking at paintings and sculptures while Evan tried to explain the architectural elements of the building itself. It was her favorite place in the world, and they hadn't been in months because he was always working. The art museum it is, Evan said. Come on, let's go tell your teacher you're leaving. They spent the afternoon wandering through galleries, Mira's hand in his, her earlier panic slowly fading into something like peace. She showed him her favorite pieces. A bronze sculpture of a dancer in mid-leap, A landscape painting that she swore looked exactly like the park near their old house. An abstract piece that was just splashes of color but somehow made her happy. "I wish I could paint like that," she said, staring at the abstract piece with longing. "You can," Evan told her. "You're already amazing at art. You just need practice." "And lessons," Mira added. "Mrs. Davis, that's my art teacher. She says I have talent, but I need proper instruction to really develop it. But lessons are expensive, right?" Evan felt that familiar ache in his chest. "Yeah, baby, they are. But maybe," he stopped himself. He'd been about to say maybe someday, maybe when things got better, but those felt like empty promises. Lies he told to make her feel better that they both knew weren't true. "It's okay," Mira said, squeezing his hand. "I can still practice on my own. And you help me. That's better than lessons anyway." She was 8 years old and already learning to lower her expectations, to make peace with less than she deserved. Evan hated that, hated what his failures had taught her about the world. They stopped for lunch at the museum cafe, splurging on sandwiches and cookies, even though Evan knew he shouldn't be spending money he didn't have. But Mira needed this. They both needed this. A few hours where life wasn't hard, where they could just be together and happy and normal. "Dad?" Mira said through a mouthful of cookie. "Are we going to be okay? With money, I mean?" Evan's hand stilled on his coffee cup. "What makes you ask that?" "I heard you on the phone last night. You sounded worried. And you're home today when you're usually at work. And you look—" She gestured vaguely at him. "Stressed. 8 years old and already reading him like a book, already worrying about adult problems." He wanted to lie, to reassure her that everything was fine, but he'd never lied to Mira before. She deserved honesty, even when it was hard. "Things are tight right now," he admitted. "The truck from work got damaged in the flood, so I'm probably going to need to find a new job. But we'll be okay. We always figure it out, right?" "Right," Mira said, but her voice was uncertain. "Hey." Evan reached across the table, took her hand. "I know things have been hard lately, and I know we can't always do everything you want or have everything we need right away. But we have each other. That's what matters. That's what makes us okay." Mira nodded, squeezing his fingers. "I know, Dad. I wish things were easier for you. You work so hard." "That's what parents do. We work hard for our kids." Evan smiled, trying to lighten the mood. "And you're worth every single second of it. You know that, right? Even when I'm annoying? Especially when you're annoying. That's when you remind me most of myself." He grinned at her outraged expression. "Come on, finish your lunch. I want to see if that architecture exhibit is still up on the 3rd floor." They spent another hour wandering through displays of blueprints and models, Evan explaining load-bearing walls and cantilevers and design philosophy, while Mira listened with the kind of focused attention she only gave to things that really interested her. She asked questions, good questions, smart questions, that showed she was really thinking about how buildings worked and why they were designed the way they were. "You'd be a good architect," Evan said as they studied a scale model of a famous building downtown. "Like you?" Mira looked up at him. "I was never an architect, just a project manager. I helped coordinate the work, made sure everything stayed on schedule and on budget." "But you wanted to be an architect, right? You have all those drawings at home." Evan was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said finally. "I did, but sometimes life takes you in different directions than you planned." "Do you think you'll ever go back to it?" Mira asked. "To architecture?" And there it was. The question that had been circling in his mind since last night, since Claire's offer, since the moment he'd recognized her in that flooded street. "Do you think you'll ever go back?" "I don't know," Evan said honestly. "Maybe, if the right opportunity came along." "I think you should," Mira said firmly. "You're always happiest when you're drawing buildings. You should do something that makes you happy." Out of the mouths of babes. Evan hugged his daughter, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. You just don't always notice." They left the museum as the afternoon light started to slant golden through the windows. Outside, the city had almost completely recovered from yesterday's storm. The streets dry, the debris mostly cleared, life moving forward like nothing had happened. But Evan knew better. The storm had changed things, had set something in motion that couldn't be undone. His phone buzzed as they walked toward the bus stop. A message from Claire. I don't want to pressure you, but I wanted you to know. I told the team about yesterday, about what you did. They all want to meet you. Evan, you have no idea how much respect people have for someone who'd risk their life for a stranger's child. Come Monday. Please. Even if you decide you don't want the job, at least let us thank you properly. Evan read the message twice, Mira peering over his arm, trying to see. Who's that? She asked. Remember the boy I saved yesterday? That's his mom. Oh, that's nice. What does she want? Evan looked at his daughter, at her bright eyes and her curious face and her complete faith that he would somehow figure everything out. He thought about the art lessons she deserved, about the apartment that was too small, about the life he wanted to give her versus the life he could actually provide. He thought about going back to that building, walking through those doors, seeing his name on business cards again. He thought about the risk, the potential for failure, the way hope could break you worse than anything. But he also thought about Mira's words. You should do something that makes you happy. She wants me to come to a meeting on Monday, Evan said. At her company. She offered me a job. Mira's face lit up. Really? That's amazing. Are you going to take it? I don't know yet. It's complicated. Why? How did you explain 5 years of complicated history to an 8-year-old? How did you explain pride and fear and the weight of secrets kept too long? Because I used to work there, Evan said carefully. A long time ago, before you really remember. And I left under not great circumstances. Going back would be hard. Mira was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she said, Mrs. Chen has a saying. She told it to me once when I was scared about trying out for the school play. She said, the only way to see if a door is locked is to try the handle. Evan stared at his daughter. That's pretty wise. I told you I'm wise. Mira grinned at him. So, are you going to try the handle, Dad? The bus was coming down the street toward them. Evan watched it approach, thinking about doors and handles, and whether he was brave enough to reach for one. Behind him, the art museum stood solid and beautiful, a building designed by someone who dared to imagine something new. Ahead of him, the bus that would take them back to their small apartment, their small life, their small safety. And in his pocket, his phone, heavy with possibility and terror, in equal measure. Yeah, Evan said, surprising himself. Yeah, I think I am. He pulled out his phone and typed a response before he could second-guess himself. I'll be there Monday morning. Thank you for the opportunity. But Claire's response came almost immediately. Thank you for giving us a chance. On 9 a.m., I'll meet you in the lobby. And Evan, whatever happens, I'm glad you're coming. The bus pulled up, its doors opening with a pneumatic hiss. Evan and Mira climbed aboard, found seats near the back, and settled in for the ride home. Mira leaned against him, tired from their day, content in the way children could be when they knew their parent was okay. And Evan watched the city slide past the windows. His city, the one he'd lived in his whole life, the one that had broken him and might just be offering to put him back together, and wondered if maybe, just maybe, he was finally ready to stop just surviving and start actually living again. Monday morning was 3 days away. 3 days to prepare himself, to figure out what to say, to decide who he was going to be when he walked through those doors. 3 days to try the handle and see if it would open, or if it would stay locked, leaving him outside in the cold, still searching for a way home. The weekend passed in a blur of nervous energy and second-guessing. Saturday morning, Evan kept his promise and took Mira to the diner for pancakes, but he barely tasted his food. His mind was already at Monday, already walking through those doors, already facing Claire and whatever complicated emotions came with her. Mira noticed, of course. She always noticed. You're doing that thing again, she said, pouring too much syrup on her pancakes. What thing? That thing where you're here but not really here. Like your body is at the table but your brain is somewhere else. She pointed her fork at him accusingly. You've been doing it all morning. Evan forced himself to focus, to be present. Sorry, baby. I'm just thinking about Monday. The job interview? It's not really an interview, more like, he struggled to find the right words, more like a conversation about possibilities. Are you scared? Mira asked, with that directness children had before the world taught them to dance around uncomfortable truths. Was he scared? Terrified. Absolutely terrified. But he couldn't tell her that, couldn't let her see how much this was shaking him. A little nervous, he admitted. It's been a long time since I worked in an office. I'm not sure I remember how. I bet it's like riding a bike, Mira said confidently. You never really forget. Evan wished he had her certainty. He spent the rest of Saturday trying to distract himself with normal weekend things, laundry, grocery shopping with the last of his paycheck, helping Mira with a school project about the solar system. But his mind kept drifting back to Monday, to the moment when he'd have to walk through those doors and face not just Claire, but the entire life he'd left behind. Sunday was worse. He woke up at 5 in the morning from a dream he couldn't quite remember, his heart pounding, his sheets soaked with sweat. The apartment was quiet except for the distant sound of traffic and someone's television bleeding through the thin walls. Evan lay in the dark and tried to breathe through the panic that was trying to claw its way up his throat. What was he doing? What made him think he could just walk back into that world after 5 years of delivering packages? He'd lost his edge, lost his confidence, lost whatever it was that had made him good at his job in the first place. Claire was making this offer out of guilt, out of gratitude, out of some misplaced sense of obligation. Not because he actually deserved it, not because he was actually good enough. By the time the sun came up, Evan had talked himself out of going at least 3 times. He'd drafted and deleted 2 different text messages to Claire canceling, coming up with excuses that sounded plausible. Mira was sick. He had another opportunity. He'd reconsidered and didn't think it was right for him. But every time his thumb hovered over the send button, he thought about his daughter's words. You should do something that makes you happy. And he thought about Mrs. Chen's wisdom, filtered through Mira's interpretation. The only way to see if a door is locked is to try the handle. He didn't send the messages, but he didn't sleep again either. Sunday afternoon, Mrs. Chen appeared at their door with a garment bag and a knowing look that made Evan both grateful and slightly uncomfortable. You have job interview tomorrow, she announced, not asking, just stating facts. You need proper clothes. I have grandson, Marcus, very successful, works in finance downtown. He left some things at my place last time he visited. You're about same size. She thrust the garment bag at Evan. Take, wear, look professional. Mrs. Chen, I can't. You can and you will. Marcus has more suits than sense. He won't miss one. She softened, reaching up to pat Evan's cheek. You're a good man, Evan. Good father. You deserve good things. Tomorrow, you walk in there with your head up, yes? You show them what they've been missing. Evan felt his throat tighten. Thank you, he managed. Don't thank me. Just succeed. That's all the thanks I need. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. And Evan, that woman who called you, the mother of the boy you saved, she must be a very special person to give you this chance. Don't waste it being scared. After she left, Evan unzipped the garment bag. Inside was a charcoal gray suit, pressed and perfect, with a white dress shirt and a navy tie. He tried it on in his bedroom, standing in front of the mirror that hung on the back of his door, and barely recognized himself. The suit fit almost perfectly, a little loose in the shoulders maybe, but nothing that would be noticeable. He looked like someone who belonged in an office, someone who made decisions and commanded respect, someone who wasn't one missed paycheck away from eviction, someone he used to be. Dad? Mira's voice from the doorway. Wow, you look really fancy. Evan turned, suddenly self-conscious. Too much? No way. You look like... Mira paused, searching for the right comparison. You look like a movie star playing a businessman, like you're about to go negotiate a really important deal or something. It's just a meeting. It's not just anything, Mira said seriously. She came into the room, studying him with an intensity that made him want to squirm. This is important. This could change things for us, right? Evan knelt down so they were eye level. Maybe. But even if it doesn't work out, we'll be okay. You know that, right? We always figure it out. I know. Mira reached out, straightening his tie with the careful precision of someone who'd watched too many movies. But I think it will work out. I have a good feeling about it. When did you become such an optimist? Somebody has to be, Mira said, grinning. You're too busy being realistic all the time. That night, Evan couldn't eat dinner. His stomach was too twisted with nerves, too tight with anticipation and dread. He pushed pasta around his plate while Mira chattered about her day, about school, about the art project she was working on. He tried to focus, tried to be present, but his mind was already at tomorrow. After Mira went to bed, Evan sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee he didn't drink and looked at his old architectural sketches. He'd pulled them out of the drawer where he kept them hidden, all those drawings he'd done late at night when he couldn't sleep, when his hands needed something to do and his mind needed somewhere to go. Buildings that didn't exist, designs that would never be built, dreams that were supposed to stay dreams. Some of them were good, really good. Even with his untrained eye, even after 5 years away from the industry, he could see that. They had vision, creativity, the kind of innovative thinking that separated adequate architecture from something special. He'd drawn these on scrap paper, on the backs of delivery receipts, on whatever he could find during breaks and lunch hours. Stolen moments of creation in a life that was otherwise just about survival. What if Claire was right? What if he did still have something to offer? What if these 5 years hadn't just been about losing things, but about learning things, about resilience and determination, and what really mattered? Or what if he was deluding himself, seeing potential that wasn't really there, setting himself up for another devastating failure? Evan gathered up the sketches and put them back in the drawer. Tomorrow would answer all these questions. Tomorrow he'd find out if the door was locked or if it would open. Tomorrow he'd discover whether second chances were real or just another cruel joke the universe liked to play on people desperate enough to hope. He went to bed but didn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Claire's face in the rain, heard her voice saying his name like a revelation and an apology all at once. He saw Liam's frightened eyes, felt the weight of the boy in his arms. He saw the office he used to have, the desk that used to be his, the life that used to be possible before everything fell apart. At 4 a.m, he gave up on sleep and got up to make coffee. The apartment was dark and quiet, except for the hum of the ancient refrigerator and the sound of his own breathing. Evan stood at the kitchen window looking out at the city waking up. Lights coming on in windows, early commuters already on the streets, the world getting ready for another Monday morning like it was just another day. But it wasn't just another day. Not for him. Today was the day he stopped running from his past and finally turned to face it. Today was the day he either reclaimed his life or learned to let it go for good. The sun rose slowly, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange that seemed almost too beautiful for how nervous Evan felt. He showered, shaved carefully, got dressed in Mrs. Chen's grandson's suit. The shirt felt stiff and foreign after years of wearing delivery uniforms and t-shirts. The tie felt like a noose. But when he looked in the mirror, he saw someone who looked capable, someone who looked professional, someone who might actually have a shot at this. Mira appeared in his doorway at 7, already dressed for school, her backpack ready. "You left the coffee pot on," she said. "I turned it off." "Thanks, baby." Evan adjusted his tie for the 5th time. "How do I look?" "Like you're going to knock 'em dead," Mira said, using a phrase she'd definitely picked up from Mrs. Chen. She came over and hugged him tight around the waist. "Good luck, Dad. Not that you need it. You're going to be amazing." "I love you. You know that, right?" "I know, and I love you too. Now go show them what you've got." Mrs. Chen was waiting in the hallway to take Mira to school. She looked Evan up and down, nodded her approval, and shooed them both out the door. "Go. Be successful. I want to hear good news when you get home." The bus ride downtown felt surreal. Evan sat among other commuters in their business clothes, carrying their briefcases and coffee cups, absorbed in their phones or newspapers. He'd watched people like this for years from his delivery truck, had envied their normal lives, their office jobs, their apparent certainty about where they were going and why. Now he was one of them, at least superficially. Inside, he felt like an imposter, a delivery driver playing dress-up, a fraud who'd be exposed the moment he opened his mouth. The building looked exactly the same. 10 stories of glass and steel on the corner of 5th and Morrison, with Dalton and Moore Architects spelled out in brushed metal letters above the entrance. Evan stood across the street, staring at it, his heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. 5 years. It had been 5 years since he'd last walked through those doors carrying a cardboard box with his belongings, trying to hold his head high while his career crumbled around him. His phone buzzed. A text from Claire. "I'm in the lobby. Whenever you're ready. No pressure." No pressure. Right. Just his entire future hanging in the balance. Just the difference between maybe giving Mira a better life or continuing to struggle paycheck to paycheck. Just everything. Evan crossed the street before he could talk himself out of it. The lobby was bright and modern, with marble floors and a waterfall feature along one wall that was new since his time here. A security desk stood near the elevators, and sitting in one of the sleek modern chairs near the windows was Claire. She stood when she saw him, and Evan's breath caught. She was in a dark blue suit that looked expensive, her hair pulled back in a neat twist, every inch the successful executive. But her eyes were nervous, her smile uncertain, and he realized she was just as anxious about this as he was. "Evan," she said, crossing to meet him, "you came. I wasn't sure. I mean, I hoped you would, but I thought maybe—" She stopped, taking a breath. "You look good. The suit, it looks good on you." "Borrowed," Evan admitted. "Evans, from a neighbor." "Well, it works." Claire gestured toward the elevators. "We're on the 6th floor now. We expanded 2 years ago, took over the entire level. It's different from what you remember. Better, I think. I hope." They stepped into the elevator together, and the doors closed, sealing them in that small space with too many unspoken things between them. Evan could smell her perfume, something light and professional, not the floral scent he remembered from 5 years ago. Everything was different. Everything was the same. "I should tell you," Claire said as the elevator climbed. "I told the team about Thursday, about what you did. They know you saved Liam, and they know—" She paused. "They know we have history, that you used to work here. I didn't go into details about why you left, just that it was during the restructuring and that I've regretted it ever since." "Did you tell them the truth?" Evan asked quietly. "About the Riverside Plaza project?" Claire met his eyes. "No, that's your story to tell if you want to tell it. I won't. I'd never share that without your permission." The elevator doors opened onto a space that made Evan stop and stare. The entire 6th floor had been transformed. Where there used to be cubicles and closed offices, now there was open workspace with glass-walled conference rooms and collaboration areas. Natural light poured in through floor-to-ceiling windows. Design displays lined the walls, photographs of completed projects, architectural models on pedestals, awards and recognition that spoke to a firm that was thriving. "This is incredible," Evan breathed. "We've done well," Claire said, and he could hear the pride in her voice. 3 major downtown projects in the last 2 years, 2 residential developments, and we just landed the contract for the new convention center expansion. The team has grown from 12 people when you were here to 32 now. She stopped, smiled. "We're successful. More than I ever imagined we could be." She led him through the office, and people looked up as they passed. Some looked curious, some smiled, some nodded politely. Evan felt exposed, on display, like he was being evaluated with every step. But Claire walked beside him with confidence, guiding him toward a conference room in the corner where he could see people already gathered. "Before we go in," Claire said, stopping outside the door, "I want to say something. You don't owe us anything, not me, not the firm, not anyone. If you walk into this meeting and decide this isn't for you, that's okay. No judgment, no hard feelings. I meant what I said about wanting to thank you properly for saving Liam. That's not contingent on you taking a job. That stands no matter what." "But you want me to take the job," Evan said. "I want—" Claire chose her words carefully. "I want you to have the opportunity you should have had 5 years ago. Whether you take it is entirely up to you. But yes, selfishly, I hope you do, because I think you'd be extraordinary here. I think we could do incredible things together, and I think—" Her voice dropped. "I think maybe we both deserve a chance to make this right." Before Evan could respond, the conference room door opened, and a woman in her 30s with short red hair and an enthusiastic smile appeared. "Claire, is this him? Is this the hero?" She extended her hand to Evan. "Jessica Chen, Senior Project Manager. I heard what you did on Thursday. That was incredibly brave. Just It was just the right thing to do, Evan managed, shaking her hand. Well, it's not every day someone risks their life like that. Come in, come in. Everyone's excited to meet you. The conference room was full, at least 15 people around a table laden with coffee, pastries, and what looked like catering from an expensive breakfast place. They all turned as Evan entered, and he felt Claire's hand on his back, gentle and steadying. Everyone, Claire said, her voice carrying authority that silenced the room. This is Evan Pierce. As I mentioned, he's someone very important to me and to this firm. He was part of our team 5 years ago, during a difficult period for the company. We lost him during restructuring, which was one of the biggest mistakes I've made in my career. And then, on Thursday, he saved my son's life. There was a moment of silence, and then the entire room erupted in applause. Evan stood there, overwhelmed, not sure where to look or what to do with his hands. People were standing, clapping, some with tears in their eyes. An older man near the end of the table was nodding with what looked like respect, maybe even approval. Please, Claire said, gesturing to an empty chair beside her at the head of the table. Sit, have some coffee. We have a lot to talk about, but first, I'd like everyone to introduce themselves. They went around the table, each person stating their name and role. Project managers, designers, structural engineers, administrative staff. Some of them had been here when Evan worked at the firm, though he barely recognized them after 5 years. Most were new, part of the expansion Claire had built. They all looked at him with curiosity, with interest, with something that looked like welcome. When the introductions finished, Claire turned to him. Evan, I'd like to show you what we're working on. Our current major project is the Riverside District Development. Yes, that Riverside, she added with a meaningful look. The Plaza project that started everything. We're now doing the entire district redevelopment, 22 blocks, mixed-use residential and commercial space, with a focus on sustainable design and community integration. It's the biggest project the firm has ever taken on. She pulled up renderings on the screen at the end of the room, and Evan felt his breath catch. The designs were beautiful, innovative without being flashy, functional without being boring. Buildings that would serve their purpose while adding something meaningful to the city's landscape. This was the kind of work he dreamed of doing back when he first entered the field. We're in phase 2 of design development, Claire continued, which means we're at a critical juncture. We need someone who can coordinate between the design team and the engineers, someone who understands both the creative vision and the practical limitations, someone who can keep us on schedule and on budget while maintaining the quality we've promised. She looked at Evan. That someone used to be you. You were the best at it. You could look at a design and immediately see the potential problems before they became actual problems. You could talk to architects in their language and engineers in theirs and make them work together instead of against each other. We've been missing that. We've been missing you. Jessica Chen spoke up. I've tried to fill that role, but honestly, it's not my strength. I'm good at managing timelines and logistics, but I don't have the architectural background to really understand the design implications. We need someone who can bridge that gap. The position would be Senior Project Coordinator, Claire said, with a path to partnership within 18 months if things work out. Salary commensurate with experience, full benefits, and she named a figure that made Evan's head spin. It was more than double what he'd been making as a delivery driver. It was more than he'd made even before he was laid off. It was life-changing money. I know this is a lot to take in, Claire said gently, and I don't expect an answer today. But I wanted you to see what we're doing, meet the team, understand what the opportunity actually looks like. We're not asking you to go back to being who you were 5 years ago. We're asking you to bring who you are now, all that experience, all that resilience, all that perspective, and help us build something even better. The room fell silent, everyone watching Evan, waiting for his response. He looked around at these faces, these people who seemed genuinely excited about the possibility of him joining them. He looked at the renderings on the screen, at the beautiful buildings waiting to be born. He looked at Claire, at this woman who had been his boss and his ghost, and was now offering him redemption. Can I? His voice came out rough. He cleared his throat, tried again. Can I ask a question? Anything, Claire said. Why me? I mean, really, beyond the guilt and the gratitude and everything that happened, Why do you really want me here? Claire didn't hesitate. Because when you were here before, you made everyone around you better. You had this way of seeing potential in people, of bringing out their best work. And because in the 5 years since you've been gone, I've learned what it means to lead a company, to build something meaningful, and I've realized that the best teams aren't made up of people who never fail. They're made up of people who fail and get back up, people who know what it costs to lose everything and fight to rebuild. You have that now, that depth, that understanding, and I think that makes you more valuable, not less. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. I'm not offering you this job because I feel bad about what happened. I'm offering it because I genuinely believe you're the best person for it, because I trust you, because I've seen what you're capable of when everything is on the line, and because, her voice softened, because some of the best work comes from people who have something to prove, not to anyone else, but to themselves. Evan felt something crack open in his chest. 5 years of carrying the weight of failure, of telling himself he wasn't good enough anymore, of shrinking his dreams to fit his circumstances. 5 years of surviving instead of living. And here was someone offering him permission to stop surviving and start thriving. But it was terrifying, because what if he took this chance and failed? What if he wasn't as good as Claire thought? What if he'd been away too long, lost too much of his edge, and he let everyone down? The fall from here would be so much farther than anything he'd experienced before. I have a daughter, Evan said, not sure why that was the first thing that came out of his mouth. She's 8. She's brilliant and creative, and she deserves a stable life. I can't take risks that might jeopardize that stability. I understand, Claire said, which is why I'm offering you a 3-month trial period. Full salary? Full benefits? But either of us can walk away at the end of those 3 months if it's not working. That gives you time to see if you like the work, if you fit with the team, if this is really what you want, and it gives us time to make sure we're the right fit for you. And if it doesn't work out, Evan asked, then you leave with 3 months of solid pay in your pocket and a glowing reference from me. No hard feelings, no burned bridges. You'd be better off than you are now, no matter what. It was a good offer, more than good. It was generous to the point of seeming unreal. Evan looked around the room again, studying faces, trying to gauge if this was genuine or some elaborate setup for future disappointment. But all he saw was anticipation, encouragement, hope. Jessica Chen spoke again. For what it's worth, I've been here 3 years, and Claire has never once brought someone in like this. She doesn't make offers lightly. If she says you're the right person, she means it. The older man who'd nodded earlier cleared his throat. Thomas Marlowe, Chief Structural Engineer. I was here when you were on staff before. I remember you catching a load miscalculation on the Meridian Tower project that would have been catastrophic if it had gone through. You saved us millions and probably some lives. You were good at this work then. I imagine you're even better now. Evan remembered Thomas, remembered that project, remembered the late night when he'd been reviewing calculations and something had just looked wrong. He'd spent hours double-checking, had finally brought his concerns to Thomas at 6 in the morning. They'd redone the entire structural analysis and found the error buried in an assumption that had seemed sound on the surface but didn't account for wind load dynamics. I remember that, Evan said quietly. I didn't know it was catastrophic. Building might have come down in a high wind event, Thomas said bluntly. Your attention to detail prevented that. We need that kind of thinking here, especially on a project as complex as Riverside District. Claire's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it, and her entire face transformed, softening into something Evan had never seen on her in a professional setting. Pure maternal love. I'm sorry, she said. I need to take this. It's Liam's school. She stepped out of the conference room, and the moment she was gone, the atmosphere shifted slightly. Less formal, more curious. Jessica Chen leaned forward with a conspiratorial smile. So, she said, what's it really like to save someone from a flood? The news made it sound incredibly dramatic. Evan found himself telling the story. The rain, the rushing water. The moment he'd seen Liam swept off his feet. The team listened with rapt attention, asking questions, responding with genuine emotion. By the time Claire came back, Evan had somehow relaxed, had somehow found himself laughing with these people, connecting with them in a way he hadn't connected with coworkers in years. Claire's face was troubled when she returned. "I'm so sorry, but I need to go. Liam is having a difficult morning, still processing everything from Thursday, I think. They're not sending him home, but they want me to come talk to him, help him settle." She looked at Evan with regret. "I had this whole presentation prepared, a tour of the office, introductions to clients." "Go," Evan said immediately. "Your son needs you. That's more important than any of this. Jessica can show you around, answer any questions you have." "And Evan," Claire paused at the door, "I meant everything I said. The offer is real. Think about it. Take your time. But I really hope—" She stopped, smiled. "I just hope you give us a chance." Then she was gone, rushing to be the parent her son needed, and Evan was left with this room full of strangers who somehow didn't feel like strangers at all. Jessica took over seamlessly, leading Evan on a tour of the office, showing him project displays, introducing him to more team members. Everyone he met was friendly, welcoming, treating him like he already belonged there. By the time they circled back to the conference room an hour later, Evan's head was spinning with names and projects and possibilities. "What do you think?" Jessica asked as they stood by the windows overlooking the city. "Could you see yourself here?" Evan looked out at the skyline, at all those buildings designed and built by people who dared to imagine something new. He thought about Mira, about the art lessons she deserved, about the apartment that was too small and the life that was too hard. He thought about his drawings hidden in a drawer, about dreams deferred for so long they'd started to feel like fantasies. "I think," he said slowly, "I think I'd be crazy not to at least try." Jessica grinned. "Does that mean you're accepting?" "It means—" Evan took a breath. "It means I need to talk to my daughter, and I need to think about what this would mean for our lives. But yeah, I think—" He felt a smile spreading across his face despite his nerves. "I think I'm going to say yes." "That's the best news I've heard all week," Jessica said. "Come on, let me show you what would be your office." She led him to a space near the windows with a view of the river. It wasn't huge, but it was bright and clean with room for a desk, bookshelves, space to spread out drawings and plans. It was an office, a real office, not a delivery truck or a cramped break room, a place where he could do meaningful work and build something that mattered. "So?" Jessica asked. "What do you think?" Evan thought about Mrs. Chen's wisdom, about trying door handles, about second chances and whether they were real or just another way to get hurt. He thought about all the reasons this could go wrong, all the ways he could fail, all the risks he'd be taking. But mostly he thought about Mira's face when he'd asked if he should do this, her absolute confidence that he should, her faith that he could. "I think," Evan said, "I think this might actually work." And for the first time in 5 years, he let himself believe it might be true. Jessica walked Evan back to the elevator an hour later, her business card pressed into his hand with her personal cell number scrawled on the back. "Call me if you have any questions," she said. "About anything, the job, the office culture, what Claire is really like as a boss, anything at all. We want you here, Evan. The whole team wants you here." The elevator doors closed on her encouraging smile, and Evan was alone with his reflection in the polished steel walls. He looked different than he had that morning, less nervous, more settled, like some part of him that had been dislocated for 5 years had finally clicked back into place. The suit still felt borrowed, but the expression on his face was his own. Something between hope and terror, and a strange, unfamiliar excitement. His phone buzzed as he crossed the lobby. A text from Claire. "How did the rest of the meeting go? Jessica said you seemed interested." "I'm sorry I had to leave. Liam needed me. He's doing better now, but Thursday really shook him. I think seeing you again might help, actually. He keeps talking about the man who saved him. Would you and your daughter want to come to dinner this week? No pressure about the job. Just let us thank you properly." Evan stood in the middle of the lobby, people flowing around him on their way to important meetings and urgent business, and read the message 3 times. Dinner. At Claire's house. With Mira. It was crossing some kind of line he couldn't quite articulate, moving from professional to personal in a way that felt dangerous. But he found himself typing a response before he could overthink it. "Let me talk to Mira." If she's comfortable with it, we'd be happy to come. The bus ride home felt different than the one that morning. The city looked brighter somehow, full of possibility instead of just obstacles. Evan watched the buildings slide past and found himself analyzing their architecture, noting design elements he liked and ones he'd have done differently. His mind was already working that way again, seeing structures not just as things that existed, but as problems solved or problems waiting to be solved. Mrs. Chen was waiting in the hallway when he got home, pretending to check her mail but obviously stationed there to intercept him. "Well?" she demanded before he'd even gotten his key in the lock. "How did it go?" "Good," Evan said, and felt a smile spread across his face despite himself. "Really good, actually. They offered me the position, Senior Project Coordinator with a path to partnership." Mrs. Chen's face lit up like Christmas morning. "I knew it. I knew they would see what I see. You're brilliant, boy, Evan. Too smart to be delivering packages forever." She reached up and hugged him, her small frame surprisingly strong. "Your daughter will be so proud." "I'm so proud." I haven't accepted yet," Evan cautioned. "I need to talk to Mira first. This is a big decision, and it affects her too." "She'll tell you to take it," Mrs. Chen said confidently. "That girl has more sense than both of us combined. Now go. She'll be home from school soon. You should change out of the suit before she sees you, or she'll guess everything." But Evan didn't change. He wanted Mira to see him like this, to see what he might become again. He paced the apartment, too wired to sit, too nervous to do anything productive. He checked his phone every few minutes, even though he knew Mira's school didn't let out until 3:30. Time felt elastic, stretching and contracting in ways that made no sense. At 3:45, he heard her footsteps on the stairs. That particular rhythm that was uniquely Mira's, slightly uneven because she always skipped the third step from the bottom. The key turned in the lock and she burst through, already talking. "Dad, you'll never believe what happened in art class today. Mrs. Davis said my perspective drawing was the best in the whole grade, and she wants to submit it to this citywide competition, and—" She stopped dead, seeing him still in the suit. "You're home, and you're still dressed up. What happened? Did it go bad? Do I need to call Mrs. Chen?" "Come sit down," Evan said, gesturing to the couch. "We need to talk." Mira's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: worry, fear, then something that looked like determination. She dropped her backpack and climbed onto the couch, sitting with her legs crossed and her hands folded in her lap like she was preparing for serious news. "Okay," she said. "I'm ready." Evan sat beside her, and suddenly all the words he'd been rehearsing on the bus ride home evaporated. How did you explain to an 8-year-old that their entire life might be about to change? That the struggle and instability that had defined their world for 5 years might be ending? That hope wasn't just a dangerous fantasy, but an actual possibility? "They offered me the job," he said simply. Mira's eyes went wide. "Really? They did? That's amazing. You're going to take it, right? Please tell me you're going to take it." "It's complicated, baby. It would mean big changes for us. Different schedule, different priorities. I'd be working in an office again, which means longer hours sometimes, more stress. I need to know you're okay with that." "Are you kidding?" Mira practically bounced on the couch. "Dad, this is what you're supposed to be doing. I've known that forever. I've seen your drawings. I've watched you explain buildings to me like they're the most fascinating things in the world. This is who you are. You've just been—" She struggled for the right word. "You've been waiting, and now you don't have to wait anymore." Evan felt his throat tighten. "When did you get so smart?" "I told you, I've always been smart. You just don't always listen." She grabbed his hand. "So you're going to say yes, right?" "There's something else," Evan said. "The woman who offered me the job, Claire, the mother of the boy I saved, she invited us to dinner this week, both of us. She wants to thank us properly, and she thought it might help her son to see me again, to know I'm okay. Would you be comfortable with that?" Mira considered this seriously. "Would it be weird, going to dinner at your boss's house?" "She's not my boss yet. And yeah, it might be a little weird, but I think—" Evan paused, trying to find the right words. "I think it might be good weird. For all of us." "Then we should go," Mira decided. "When?" "I need to text her back and find out. Probably later this week." "Okay. But Dad?" Mira's expression turned serious. You have to promise me something. If you take this job, if we do this whole new life thing, you can't forget why we're doing it. It's not just about money or success or proving something. It's about you being happy, about you getting to do work that matters to you. Promise me that's why you're doing this." Evan pulled his daughter into a hug, overwhelmed by her wisdom, by her ability to cut through all his complicated emotions and fears and see the simple truth underneath. "I promise," he said into her hair. "I promise I'm doing this for the right reasons." "Good." Mira pulled back, grinning. "Now can we celebrate? I think this deserves pizza. The good pizza, not the frozen kind." They ordered from the expensive place down the street, the one they only got on special occasions, and ate straight from the box while Mira told him about her day. The perspective drawing that Mrs. Davis loved, the math test she'd aced despite her breakdown on Friday, the book report she had due next week. Normal things, everyday things, the steady rhythm of a child's life. But underneath it all, Evan could feel the shift happening. The ground beneath them was changing, becoming more solid, more stable. They were building towards something instead of just hanging on. After dinner, while Mira did her homework at the kitchen table, Evan texted Claire back. "Mira would love to come to dinner. Just let us know when works for you." Claire's response came quickly. "How about Wednesday? 6 o'clock? Nothing fancy, just a chance for the kids to meet and for us to say thank you properly. Liam hasn't stopped talking about his hero. I think seeing you again would really help him." Evan felt something warm spread through his chest. His hero. He'd never thought of himself that way, had just done what anyone would do. But maybe that was what heroism really was. Not some grand gesture, but just doing the right thing when it needed doing, regardless of the cost. "Wednesday works. Thank you for including Mira. She's excited to meet Liam. I'm excited for them to meet too. And Evan, I'm really glad you're considering the position. Whatever you decide, I want you to know, having you at that meeting today, seeing you in the office again, it felt right. Like something that should have been there all along finally was." Evan stared at those words, not sure how to respond. There was something in them that felt like more than just professional courtesy, more than just gratitude. Something that spoke to the complicated tangle of history between them, the years of silence, the mutual guilt they'd both been carrying. "I felt it too," he typed, then deleted it. Too much. Too revealing. "Thank you for saying that," he wrote instead. "See you Wednesday." The next 2 days passed in a strange liminal space between his old life and his potential new one. Evan spent Tuesday morning calling unemployment offices and filling out paperwork for his final paycheck from the delivery company. The amount was pitifully small, just 3 days' worth of wages minus deductions for the uniform he'd never returned. It should have been depressing, this official end to that chapter of his life. Instead, it felt like closure. That afternoon, he pulled out his old portfolio from the back of his closet. It was dusty and outdated, filled with projects from before Mira was born, before everything fell apart. He spent hours updating it, adding in some of his recent sketches, trying to create something that represented who he was now rather than who he'd been. The work was rough in places. He was out of practice with the technical software, but the creativity was still there. The vision was still there. Tuesday evening, Mrs. Chen appeared at the door with a casserole and unsolicited advice. "You need haircut before you start new job," she announced, handing him the dish. "You look like delivery driver, not professional architect person. I know good place, very reasonable. My nephew Marco, he cuts hair for all the business people downtown. I'll call him, tell him you need appointment." "Mrs. Chen, You can say thank you and let me help," she interrupted firmly. "You saved that boy's life. You're finally getting chance you deserve. Let people who care about you be happy and help. That's what community means, yes?" So Evan found himself at Marco's barbershop Wednesday afternoon, getting a haircut that was more expensive than he was used to, but left him looking polished and professional. Marco, who turned out to be as talkative as his aunt, kept up a steady stream of conversation about business and success and taking chances when they came your way. By the time Evan left, he felt like he'd been through a therapy session and a pep talk combined. He picked Mira up from school at 3, both of them slightly nervous about the dinner ahead. She'd insisted on wearing her best dress, the blue one with flowers that she usually saved for holidays, and had spent 20 minutes that morning trying to get her hair just right. "Do I look okay?" she asked for the third time as they waited at the bus stop. "Not too fancy, but not too casual? I want to make a good impression." "You look perfect," Evan assured her. "And you don't need to impress anyone. Just be yourself. That's more than enough." They stopped at a store on the way to buy flowers and a dessert to bring. Evan stood in the bakery section, staring at cakes and pies and fancy pastries, trying to figure out what you brought to dinner at your former boss's house when she'd offered you your dream job and you'd saved her son's life. In the end, Mira picked out a chocolate cake because everyone likes chocolate with a certainty that only children could have. Claire's house looked different in the fading evening light, less ominous, more welcoming. The lawn had been cleaned up from the flooding, and warm light glowed from the windows. Before Evan could even knock, the door flew open and Liam stood there, his face breaking into a huge smile. "You came! Mom said you were coming, but I wasn't sure if you'd really come." The boy looked at Evan with something approaching worship. "You're really here." "I'm really here," Evan said, feeling awkward and touched in equal measure. "And this is my daughter, Mira. Mira, this is Liam." "Hi," Mira said, suddenly shy. "It's nice to meet you." "You're his daughter?" Liam looked at Mira with interest. "That means your dad is a hero too. That's pretty cool." "He's just my dad," Mira said, but she was grinning. "But yeah, I guess he's pretty cool sometimes." Claire appeared behind her son, and Evan's breath caught. She wasn't in a business suit tonight. She wore jeans and a simple green sweater, her hair down around her shoulders, looking more relaxed than he'd ever seen her. More real. More like a person and less like the polished executive or the woman frozen in his memories. "Come in," she said, her smile warm and genuine. "Please. I'm so glad you could make it." The inside of the house was still cluttered, but in a more organized way, like Claire had made an effort to clean up without quite achieving perfect tidiness. It made Evan relax somehow, seeing that her life wasn't as polished as her office presence suggested. She was human, struggling with the same work-life balance everyone faced, doing her best and sometimes falling short. "Something smells amazing," Evan said, following her toward the kitchen. "Don't get too excited. I'm not much of a cook," Claire admitted, "but I make a decent lasagna, and I figured it's hard to mess up garlic bread." She saw the cake Mira was holding. "Oh, you didn't need to bring anything. We wanted to," Mira said. "It's chocolate. Everyone likes chocolate." "Everyone does," Claire agreed, taking the cake with a smile that made Mira beam. "Liam, why don't you show Mira your room? I have some video games you guys might like, and dinner won't be ready for another 20 minutes. The kids disappeared upstairs in that way children could, instant friends bonded by proximity and possibility. Evan found himself alone in the kitchen with Claire, both of them suddenly awkward without the buffer of their children. "Can I help with anything?" Evan asked. "You can open the wine," Claire said, pointing to a bottle on the counter. "I figured we both earned a glass after the week we've had." They worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, Evan opening wine, Claire pulling the lasagna from the oven, both of them moving around the kitchen in a dance that felt strangely natural. Finally, with glasses poured and the food cooling, they gravitated toward the small table by the window. "I've been thinking about what you said," Claire began, swirling wine in her glass. "About needing to talk to Mira before deciding. What did she say?" "She told me I'd be crazy not to take it," Evan admitted. "She's 8 years old and somehow wiser than I am." "Kids usually are." Claire took a sip of wine. "Liam has been different since Thursday, quieter, more clingy. He had a nightmare the other night about drowning, but when I told him you were coming to dinner, he lit up. He's been counting down the hours." She paused. "You gave him back to me, Evan. I don't know how to thank you for that. I don't know if there are words big enough." "You don't have to thank me," Evan said quietly. "I didn't save him for gratitude. I saved him because he was a kid in trouble, and I was there." "I know, but I'm still grateful. More than you can possibly know." Claire set down her glass. "Can I ask you something? And you don't have to answer if you don't want to." "Okay. Why did you do it? 5 years ago, I mean. Why did you take the fall for that project when it wasn't your fault?" "I've been trying to understand, and I think maybe I do now," but I need to hear it from you." Evan looked at his wine, at the deep red color that reminded him of blood and sacrifice and choices that changed everything. He'd carried this secret for so long, had convinced himself it didn't matter, that the past was past. But Claire deserved the truth. She'd always deserved the truth. "You were pregnant," he said simply, "and scared, and it wasn't your fault. The mistake was Marcus Chen's, but he was a senior partner and you were just starting out. If the truth came out, he would have thrown you under the bus to protect himself. You would have been fired, probably blacklisted, and you were about to have a baby as a single mother. I couldn't—" He stopped, took a breath. "I couldn't let that happen to you." "But it happened to you instead," Claire said, her voice thick with emotion. "You lost everything." "Not everything. I had Mira. I built a different life. It wasn't the life I planned, but it was—" Evan searched for the right word. "It was honest. I learned things I never would have learned otherwise, about resilience, about what actually matters, about being a father when there's no backup, no safety net. I don't regret it, Claire. I'm angry about it sometimes, and it hurt like hell, but I don't regret protecting you." Claire's eyes were bright with tears. "You should have told me. You should have given me the choice." "Maybe, but you were pregnant and terrified and barely holding on. What kind of choice would that have been?" Evan met her eyes. "I don't blame you for what happened. I need you to know that. You didn't know, and by the time you found out, there was no way to fix it without destroying your own career. You made the best choice you could with the information you had." "That's generous," Claire said softly. "More generous than I deserve." "We all do the best we can," Evan said. "Sometimes our best isn't perfect. Sometimes we make choices we regret. But we keep going. We try to make it right when we can." "Is that what this is?" Claire asked. "Me trying to make it right?" "Maybe. But it's also you giving me a genuine opportunity. I've seen the office, met the team, reviewed the project details. You're not offering me charity. You're offering me a real position doing real work that I'm actually qualified for. That's different." Before Claire could respond, the kids came thundering down the stairs, Liam chattering excitedly about a video game while Mira listened with polite interest. The moment of intimate conversation was over, replaced by the cheerful chaos of dinner with children. They ate at the dining room table, which had been cleared of its usual clutter for the occasion. The lasagna was good, the garlic bread perfectly crispy, and the conversation flowed easily between bites. Liam told the story of the flood from his perspective, how he'd gone outside because he dropped his toy in the rain and wanted to get it, how the water had suddenly risen so fast, how scared he'd been until Evan had pulled him out. "You weren't scared at all, were you?" Liam asked Evan, his eyes wide with admiration. "I was terrified," Evan admitted, "but sometimes being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing what needs to be done anyway." "Oh, that's what Mom says too," Liam said, glancing at Claire. "She says being brave is doing hard things even when you're scared." "Your mom is a smart woman," Evan said, and saw Claire's cheeks flush slightly. After dinner, they had the chocolate cake and coffee while the kids played in the living room. Evan helped Claire clean up, falling into an easy rhythm of washing and drying dishes while their children's laughter drifted in from the other room. "I've made a decision," Evan said as he dried a plate. "About the job." Claire's hands stilled in the soapy water. "And?" "I want to accept. The 3-month trial period you mentioned, that works for me. It gives both of us an out if it doesn't work. But I think it will work. I want it to work." He set down the plate, turned to face her. "I'm ready to stop surviving and start living again." The smile that spread across Claire's face was radiant. "You have no idea how happy that makes me. The whole team is going to be thrilled." She dried her hands, held one out to shake. "Welcome to Dalton and Moore, Evan. Again. Or maybe for the first time, since everything is different now." Evan took her hand, but instead of shaking it, he held it for a moment. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for the second chance, for believing I still had something to offer, for—" He gestured vaguely at the house, the evening, the complicated tangle of their history. "For all of it. Thank you for saying yes," Claire said, "and for saving my son. And for—" Her voice dropped. "For protecting me 5 years ago even though you didn't have to. I know I've said it before, but I need you to really hear it. I'm sorry. For not speaking up, for not fighting harder to keep you, for letting my fear override my integrity. I'm sorry. I know, Evan said, and I forgive you. We're both different people now. Let's build something new instead of dwelling on what was. They stood there in the kitchen, hands still clasped, the weight of 5 years finally lifting. It wasn't perfect closure. There would still be complicated moments, still be echoes of the past to navigate. But it was a beginning, a real one. Mom, Liam called from the living room. Can Mira come over again? We didn't finish the game. Can we, Dad? Mira's voice joined in. Please? Claire and Evan looked at each other and laughed. I think that's a yes from both kids, Claire said. How about Saturday afternoon? You could come over, we could order pizza, let them play while we go over the details of your start date and what to expect in the first few weeks. That sounds perfect, Evan said. They collected their things, said their goodbyes, and headed out into the cool evening air. Mira chattered the whole bus ride home about Liam and his games and how nice his mom was. Evan listened with half his attention, the other half already thinking about Monday morning, about walking into that office not as a visitor but as an employee, about the work waiting for him, the challenges ahead, the chance to prove himself all over again. Mrs. Chen was predictably waiting in the hallway when they got home, and Mira immediately launched into a detailed recap of the evening. Evan left them talking and went into his bedroom, pulling out his old ID badge from the delivery company. He looked at it for a long moment, at his tired face in the photo, at the job title that had defined him for the last 4 years. Then he dropped it in the trash can beside his desk. That night, after Mira was asleep, Evan pulled out his architectural sketches and spread them across the kitchen table. He studied them with fresh eyes, seeing both the promise and the flaws, understanding that he'd been maintaining his skills without even realizing it. All those late nights drawing, all those hours explaining building design to Mira, all that knowledge had stayed alive even when he'd thought it was dead. His phone buzzed. A message from Claire. Official offer letter will be in your email tomorrow morning. Start date is next Monday, if that works for you. Also, thank you for coming tonight. Liam went to bed happy for the first time since the flood. You gave him his sense of safety back just by being here. Evan read the message twice, feeling something settle in his chest. This was real. This was happening. He was getting his life back, but better this time because he knew what it felt like to lose it. He'd never take it for granted again. Monday works perfectly, he typed back. And thank you for tonight. Mira hasn't stopped talking about Liam. I think they're going to be good friends. Just like their parents? Claire responded. Evan stared at that message, at the question implicit in those 4 words. Were they friends? Could they be, with all their history? Or were they something else entirely? 2 people bound together by crisis and gratitude and the complicated math of second chances? Maybe better than their parents, he wrote, since they're starting without all our baggage. Fair point. Sleep well, Evan. Big week ahead. You too, Claire. And thanks again. For everything. He set down his phone and looked around his small apartment, at the water-stained ceiling, the cramped kitchen, the walls covered in Mira's art. This place had been his refuge and his prison for 5 years. Soon it would just be a memory, a stepping stone between who he'd been forced to become and who he was choosing to be. The sketches on the table caught his eye. One in particular, a design for a community center with natural light flooding through skylights, spaces that flowed into each other, architecture that served people instead of just impressing them. He'd drawn it 6 months ago on the back of a pizza receipt, had almost thrown it away a dozen times. Now he pulled out his phone and took a photo of it. On Monday, he'd show it to Claire. See if there was space in the Riverside District project for something like this. See if his ideas still had value in the real world beyond his kitchen table. But that was Monday. Tonight was just him and his daughter sleeping peacefully down the hall and the strange, terrifying, wonderful knowledge that everything was about to change. Evan gathered up his sketches, filed them carefully in a folder labeled Portfolio, and went to check on Mira one last time. She was sprawled across her bed, one arm around her stuffed elephant, her face peaceful in sleep. He stood in the doorway watching her breathe, this person who'd given him purpose when he had nothing else, who'd kept him going through the hardest years of his life. We're going to be okay, he whispered into the darkness. Better than okay. We're going to actually be happy. Mira stirred slightly, smiled in her sleep, and settled deeper into her pillow. Evan pulled her door mostly closed and headed to his own room. Tomorrow he'd call his landlord about breaking the lease, start looking at apartments in better neighborhoods near better schools. Tomorrow he'd buy new work clothes, set up his email, prepare for his first day. Tomorrow he'd start building the future he thought was lost forever. But tonight, he let himself feel what he hadn't allowed himself to feel in 5 years. Hope. Real, genuine, terrifying hope that maybe the worst was behind them. That maybe the flood that had nearly drowned him had actually washed away all the debris blocking his path. That maybe, just maybe, he was finally going home. He fell asleep with a smile on his face, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he didn't dream about drowning. He dreamed about buildings rising toward the sky, about blueprints coming to life, about his daughter's face when she saw him truly happy. He dreamed about second chances and new beginnings and the strange mercy of floods that destroy and create in equal measure. And when he woke Sunday morning to sunshine streaming through his window and Mira singing in the kitchen while she made cereal, Evan knew with absolute certainty that he'd made the right choice. The door hadn't been locked after all. He just needed to be brave enough to try the handle. Now it was swinging wide open, and all he had to do was walk through. Sunday passed in a haze of preparation and anticipation. Evan spent the morning sorting through his closet, realizing he owned exactly 2 dress shirts that weren't stained or frayed at the collar, and neither of them really fit anymore after 5 years of physical labor had changed his body. Mrs. Chen appeared at noon with her grandson Marcus in tow, and before Evan could protest, he was being measured for 2 new shirts that Marcus swore he could have ready by Monday morning from a friend who owed him a favor. You can't show up to fancy architecture job looking like you got dressed at thrift store, Mrs. Chen declared, ignoring Evan's weak protests about not being able to afford new clothes right now. Consider it investment in your future. You pay me back when you get first paycheck, yes? So Evan found himself the recipient of an entire community's investment in his success. Mrs. Chen's loans, Marco's discounted haircut, the neighbor 2 floors down who heard about his new job and dropped off a leather portfolio that her late husband used to carry. By Sunday evening, Evan looked at himself in the mirror and saw someone who might actually belong in that office, who might actually deserve the chance he was being given. Mira sat on his bed watching him try on different combinations of shirts and ties, offering commentary with the brutal honesty only children possessed. That tie makes you look like you're going to a funeral, she announced when he tried a dark gray one. Try the blue one. Blue is good for first days. How do you know that? Evan asked, switching ties. Mrs. Chen told me. She knows everything about being professional. Her son was a lawyer, remember? Was? He passed away, Mira said matter-of-factly. That's why she's so invested in helping you. She said you remind her of him, always trying to do the right thing even when it's hard. Evan felt his throat tighten. He'd known Mrs. Chen had lost her son years ago, but he hadn't realized she saw echoes of him in Evan. The weight of that trust, that hope she was placing in him, felt both humbling and terrifying. The blue tie it is, he said, his voice rough. That night, Evan lay awake again, but this time not from anxiety, from excitement. From the strange lightness that came with knowing tomorrow wasn't just another day of survival, but the first day of actually building towards something. He kept running through scenarios in his head, walking into the office, meeting with the team, reviewing the Riverside District plans, proving that Claire's faith in him wasn't misplaced. At some point, he must have fallen asleep because his alarm jolted him awake at 5:30 Monday morning. Evan showered, shaved with extra care, and dressed slowly in his borrowed suit and new shirt. The blue tie Mira had chosen. When he emerged from his bedroom, she was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with cereal and a huge smile. You look perfect, she announced. Very professional, very successful architecture person. I haven't done anything yet, Evan cautioned, but he was smiling. You will, though. I know you will. Mira got up and hugged him tight. Good luck, Dad. Go show them what you're made of. Mrs. Chen insisted on walking him to the bus stop, even though it was barely 6:30 and she usually didn't rise until 7. Big Day deserves proper send-off, she said, linking her arm through his like they were heading to something momentous. Which, Evan supposed, they were. You know you don't owe me anything, right? Evan said as they waited for the bus. The shirts, the advice, all the help. I can never repay all this. You repay by succeeding, Mrs. Chen said firmly. By being good father to that beautiful girl. By taking this chance and making something of it. That's all the payment I need. She patted his arm. Now go. Your bus is coming. Make us proud. The bus ride downtown felt surreal. Evan sat among the Monday morning commuters, all of them absorbed in their phones or newspapers, and tried to calm his racing heart. This was it. The moment where theory became reality, where possibility became practice. He'd said yes. He'd shown up. Now he had to prove he could actually do the work. The building looked imposing in the early morning light, all glass and steel and promise. Evan stood across the street for a moment, just breathing, just being. Then he crossed and walked through those doors like he belonged there. Because starting today, he did. Claire was waiting in the lobby and her face lit up when she saw him. You came early, she said, checking her watch. It's only 7:15. Couldn't sleep, Evan admitted. Too nervous, too excited, too everything. Come on, let me show you your office before everyone else gets here. I had it set everything up over the weekend. Computer, phone, access to all our systems. You're fully integrated. She led him to the elevators, talking the whole way about the day's schedule, the people he'd be working with, the projects he'd be coordinating. We have team meeting at 9, but I thought we could start with just us. Go over the Riverside District plans, talk about your role, make sure you're comfortable before throwing you into the deep end. They stepped off the elevator into the quiet office. Without the bustle of people, Evan could really appreciate the space, the clean lines, the natural light, the sense of purposeful design. This was a place built for creating, for collaboration, for bringing ideas to life. His office looked different than it had on his tour. Now there was a nameplate on the door. Evan Pierce, Senior Project Coordinator. His name, his title, his space. Evan stood in the doorway, staring at that nameplate, feeling the reality of it sink in. I had them make it over the weekend, Claire said softly from behind him. I wanted you to see it first thing, to know this is real. Evan turned to her and suddenly all the professional distance he'd been trying to maintain crumbled. Thank you, he said, and his voice cracked. I don't mean just for the job. I mean for believing I could still do this, for not writing me off, for giving me another chance when you had no reason to. I had every reason to, Claire said. You saved my son, Evan. But more than that, you saved me 5 years ago when you didn't have to. This isn't charity or guilt. This is me finally doing what I should have done back then, fighting for someone who deserved better. They stood there in the doorway of his new office, years of complicated history and unspoken emotions hanging between them. Then Claire smiled and the moment shifted from heavy to hopeful. Come on, she said. Let me show you what we're building. They spent the next hour hunched over blueprints and renderings, Claire walking Evan through every detail of the Riverside District development. It was even more ambitious than he'd realized. 22 blocks of mixed-use space designed to revitalize a part of the city that had been neglected for decades. Residential towers, retail spaces, green areas, a community center. The kind of project architects dreamed about. Your main role will be coordinating between our design team and the engineering firm, Claire explained, pointing to various sections of the plans. Making sure everyone's on the same timeline, catching potential conflicts before they become actual problems. Keeping the client informed without overwhelming them. It's a lot of juggling, but I remember you were excellent at it. That was 5 years ago, Evan said. I'm going to be rusty. Then we'll knock the rust off together. Claire pulled up a project timeline on her computer. First major milestone is 3 weeks away. We need to present Phase 2 designs to the Planning Commission. That gives you time to get up to speed, review everything, identify any issues. Think you can do that? Evan studied the timeline, his mind already working through the logistics, seeing the potential bottlenecks and challenges. It was like a muscle he hadn't used in years, suddenly remembering what it was built for. Yeah, he said, feeling more confident. Yeah, I can do that. I know you can. Claire checked her watch. People will start arriving soon. Why don't you take some time to settle in, set up your space? I'll come get you before the team meeting. Alone in his office, Evan stood at the window looking out at the city. This view, he'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be above street level, to see the urban landscape from this perspective. From up here, you could see patterns and connections, could understand how buildings related to each other, how the city functioned as an integrated system. It was the view of someone who helped build things, not someone who just delivered packages to addresses. He unpacked the portfolio the neighbor had given him, arranged his few belongings on the desk. The space was still mostly empty, waiting to be personalized, waiting to become his. On impulse, he pulled out his phone and looked at the photo he'd taken of his community center sketch. Before he could second-guess himself, he printed it and pinned it to the bulletin board on his wall. A reminder of what was possible. A promise to himself. Knock, knock. Jessica Chen appeared in his doorway, grinning. "Welcome to day one. How are you feeling?" "Terrified and excited in equal measure," Evan admitted. "That's the sweet spot." She came in, handed him a coffee. "Fair warning, the team is beyond excited you're here. Claire's been talking about you all weekend. You're basically a celebrity." "I saved a kid from a flood. That doesn't make me qualified to coordinate a massive development project." "No, but 10 years of experience and natural talent do." Jessica leaned against his desk. "Look, I know you're nervous. I know you've been away from this world for a while. But Claire doesn't make bad hiring decisions. If she thinks you can do this, you can. Trust that." By 9 o'clock, the office was full of people, and the conference room was packed for the team meeting. Evan sat beside Claire at the big table, trying not to feel like everyone was watching him, even though they definitely were. Claire started the meeting with updates on various projects, then turned to him. "As you all know, Evan Pierce has joined us as Senior Project Coordinator for the Riverside District Development." Evan brings extensive experience in project management and coordination, and more importantly, he brings the kind of integrity and dedication we value here at Dalton & Moore. She looked at him with a warmth that made his chest tight. "Evan, want to say a few words?" Every face in the room turned to him expectantly. Evan took a breath, stood up, and tried to remember how to speak in front of a group. "I'm grateful to be here," he started, his voice stronger than he expected. 5 years ago, I left this field under difficult circumstances. I spent those years doing work that taught me a lot about resilience, about persistence, about what really matters. I'm not the same person I was then. I'm better, more grounded, more aware of how lucky I am to get a second chance at doing work I love. He looked around the room, making eye contact. "I know I have a lot to prove. I know I'll make mistakes as I get back up to speed. But I promise you this, I'll work harder than anyone else in this room. I'll do everything I can to make this project succeed, and I won't take a single day of this opportunity for granted." The room erupted in applause, and Evan felt his face heat. But he also felt something else. Acceptance. Welcome. These people wanted him here. They were rooting for him. That made all the difference. The meeting continued with technical discussions about various projects. Evan listened intently, taking notes, asking questions when things weren't clear. It was like learning a language he used to speak fluently, but had forgotten some vocabulary. The basics were still there, muscle memory kicking in, but he had to work to keep up. After the meeting, people approached him one by one, introducing themselves properly, offering help, sharing their excitement about the Riverside project. Thomas Marlowe, the structural engineer who'd remembered him from before, pulled him aside. "I meant what I said last week," Thomas said quietly. "You were good at this work before. My guess is you're even better now. Don't let imposter syndrome tell you otherwise." "How did you know I was dealing with imposter syndrome?" Evan asked. "Because everyone deals with it. The good ones, anyway. The ones who care enough to worry about doing the job right." Thomas clapped him on the shoulder. "You'll be fine, Pierce. Just trust your instincts." The first week passed in a blur of meetings, review sessions, and late nights trying to absorb 5 years' worth of changes in building codes, software, and industry practices. Evan arrived early and stayed late, determined to prove he deserved to be there. He took stacks of documents home, studying project specifications and construction schedules after Mira went to bed. "Dad, you're doing that thing again," Mira said Friday evening, finding him at the kitchen table with blueprints spread everywhere. "What thing?" "Being here, but not here. Like your brain is at work even though your body is home." She climbed into the chair beside him. Is the job too hard? Are you okay? Evan set down his pen, giving her his full attention. The job is challenging, really challenging, but I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. I'm remembering how much I love this work. Even when it's hard? Especially when it's hard, because hard means it matters. Hard means I'm building something real. He pulled her onto his lap like he did when she was smaller. But you're right. I need to be better about leaving work at work. How about tomorrow we do something fun? Just you and me? Can we go back to the art museum? I want to show you the new exhibition Mrs. Davis told us about. Art museum it is. Saturday morning brought a text from Claire as Evan and Mira were finishing breakfast. Would you and Mira want to come over this afternoon? Liam keeps asking when he gets to see you again, and I thought maybe the kids could play while you and I go over some Riverside details. Or we could just hang out. No pressure, just friends spending time together. Evan read it twice, caught on that word. Friends. Was that what they were becoming? Could they be, with all their history? Or were they something else? Two people who'd circled each other's orbits for years, pulled together by crisis and circumstances, and a connection neither of them quite knew how to name. What do you think? He asked Mira, showing her the message. Want to hang out with Liam this afternoon? Yes, but Dad... Mira's face turned serious. Are you and Miss Claire dating? Evan nearly choked on his coffee. What? No, why would you think that? Because you smile differently when you talk about her, and you get that look on your face like you're thinking about something nice. And she looks at you the same way. I'm not blind, Dad. We're colleagues and friends. That's all. Okay, Mira said in that tone children used when they clearly didn't believe you but were willing to let it go for now. But if you did want to date her, I'd be okay with it, just so you know. She's nice, and Liam's cool. We could be like, what's that word? A blended family? Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Evan said, his mind spinning. Was he interested in Claire that way? He hadn't even let himself consider it, had been so focused on proving himself professionally that personal feelings had seemed off limits. But Mira was right. There was something there. Something that went beyond gratitude or shared history. Something that had been growing every time they worked late together. Every time their hands brushed reaching for the same blueprint. Every time she smiled at him, like she was genuinely happy he existed. They showed up at Claire's house at 2, and the kids immediately disappeared into the backyard where Claire had set up some kind of art project involving painting rocks. Through the kitchen window, Evan and Claire watched them work, their heads bent together in concentration. They're good for each other, Claire said softly. Liam's been less anxious since meeting Mira. Having a friend who just accepts him without knowing about the flood trauma, it's been really healing. Mira adores him, Evan said. She talks about him constantly. I think she's just happy to have a friend whose parent understands what it's like to be a single parent. Claire turned to look at him, and something in her expression made his heart beat faster. Can I ask you something personal? And you can tell me if I'm overstepping. Okay. Your ex-wife, do you still have feelings for her? Evan was surprised by the question, but the answer came easily. No. Honestly, I think whatever I felt for her died years before she actually left. We were never really compatible. We just didn't realize it until everything fell apart. She wanted a certain lifestyle, a certain status. When I couldn't provide that anymore, there was nothing left to hold us together. That must have been hard, going through all that and losing your marriage too. In some ways, her leaving was a relief. It meant I could stop pretending, stop trying to be someone I wasn't. I could just focus on being a good father to Mira. He paused, then decided to be brave. What about you? Liam's father, is he in the picture? He never was, Claire said quietly. It was a brief relationship, and when I told him I was pregnant, he made it very clear he wasn't interested in being a father. Signed away his rights before Liam was even born. I've been doing this alone since the beginning. That takes incredible strength. So does rebuilding your entire life after losing everything. And Claire moved closer, her shoulder almost touching his. I think we're both stronger than we give ourselves credit for. They stood there watching their children paint rocks in the afternoon sun, and Evan felt something shift. Some boundary they'd been carefully maintaining was dissolving, replaced by the simple truth that they liked each other. that they'd been dancing around something real for weeks now, that maybe their second chance wasn't just professional. "Claire," Evan said, his voice low, "Mira asked me this morning if we were dating." Claire's breath caught. "What did you tell her?" "I told her no, that we were colleagues and friends." He turned to face her fully. "But I think I might have lied, or at least told her an incomplete truth." "What's the complete truth?" Claire asked, her eyes searching his face. "The complete truth is that I think about you constantly, that I look forward to every meeting because it means I get to see you. That when I'm working on Riverside plans, half my brain is focused on the project and half is thinking about how you'll react when I show you what I've found." He took a breath. "The complete truth is, I think I'm falling for you, and I have no idea if that's professional suicide or the best thing that could possibly happen." Claire's hand found his, their fingers interlacing naturally, easily, like they'd been doing this for years instead of seconds. "The complete truth," she said softly, "is that I've been falling for you since the moment you pulled my son out of that flood. Maybe even before that. Maybe I never really stopped, even when you were gone. Maybe that's why losing you 5 years ago hurt so much. Why I carried that guilt like a weight I couldn't put down." "We're supposed to keep things professional," Evan said, but he was smiling, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "We're supposed to do a lot of things," Claire countered, "but sometimes what we're supposed to do and what we should do are different things." Outside, Mira looked up from a rock painting and caught sight of them through the window. Her face broke into the biggest smile Evan had ever seen, and she immediately turned to Liam to whisper something that made him look up too. Both kids started giggling, pointing at their parents, clearly delighted by what they were witnessing. "I think our cover is blown," Evan said, laughing. "Good," Claire said. "I'm tired of pretending anyway." She leaned in and kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise. It was a first kiss that felt like coming home, like something that had been waiting to happen for 5 years finally, being allowed to exist. When they pulled apart, Evan was grinning like an idiot, and Claire's cheeks were flushed. "We should probably talk about this," Claire said. "Figure out boundaries, how to handle it at work, what it means for—" "Later," Evan said, kissing her again. "We can figure out all the complicated stuff later. Right now, can we just be happy?" "Yeah," Claire breathed. "We can do that." They spent the rest of the afternoon as two families becoming one, painting rocks with the kids, grilling burgers in the backyard, laughing at jokes that weren't particularly funny but felt hilarious in the golden light of late afternoon. And when evening came and it was time to leave, Mira hugged Liam goodbye like they were old friends, and Claire walked Evan to the door with her hand in his. "Monday is going to be interesting," she said. "The whole office is going to know something's changed." "Let them know," Evan said. "I'm not ashamed of this, of us." "Neither am I." She kissed him once more. "See you Monday, Mr. Pierce." "See you Monday, Ms. Dalton." The next 3 weeks flew by in a blur of work and new relationship energy and the sweet satisfaction of building something meaningful. Evan threw himself into the Riverside project with everything he had, and the team responded to his enthusiasm, his attention to detail, his ability to see problems before they became crises. The presentation to the Planning Commission went flawlessly, with Evan coordinating every element so smoothly that Claire pulled him aside afterward. "That was brilliant," she said, her eyes shining with pride. "You weren't just good up there, you were exceptional. The commission was eating out of your hand." "I had good material to work with," Evan deflected, but he was glowing from the praise. "Take the compliment," Claire said, squeezing his hand. "You earned it." Their relationship became an open secret at the office, not officially announced, but not hidden either. People seemed genuinely happy for them, and the few raised eyebrows came from a place of surprise rather than judgment. Jessica Chen cornered Evan in the break room one afternoon with a knowing smile. "I knew it," she said. From that first day when Claire looked at you like you hung the moon. I told Thomas we'd have a workplace romance within a month." "Is that a problem?" Evan asked carefully. "Are you kidding? It's perfect. You two balance each other. She grounds your creativity, and you remind her to take risks. Plus, you're both disgustingly cute together." Jessica grinned. "Just don't make the rest of us feel too single, okay?" At home, Mira and Mrs. Chen were equally invested in the relationship's progress. Mira had taken to drawing pictures of all four of them together, her and Evan and Claire and Liam, like she was manifesting a future family into existence through sheer artistic will. Mrs. Chen had started making extra casseroles in case Claire and Liam want to join you for dinner, with increasing frequency. "You're all very subtle," Evan told them one evening when yet another casserole appeared at the door. "We're not trying to be subtle," Mira said. "We're trying to be supportive. There's a difference." 6 weeks into his new position, Claire called Evan into her office with an expression he couldn't quite read. His stomach dropped. Had he made a mistake? Was the 3-month trial period being cut short? Had he done something wrong? "Sit down," Claire said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. When he did, she slid a document across to him. "The partners and I had a meeting this morning. About you." Evan's heart sank. "And?" "And we're unanimous." Claire's face broke into a smile. "We want to extend the partnership offer early. You've proven yourself 10 times over in just 6 weeks, Evan. The Riverside project is ahead of schedule and under budget. The team adores you, and you've already identified 3 potential issues that would have cost us millions if they'd gone unnoticed. You're not just meeting expectations, you're exceeding them." Evan stared at the document. Partnership. Equity in the firm. His name on the letterhead alongside Claire's. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Claire urged. "Say you'll take the leap and be my partner. In business and—" She paused, suddenly vulnerable. "And maybe in everything else too. If you want that. If it's not too fast or too complicated or too—" Evan stood up, rounded the desk, and pulled her into a kiss that said everything he couldn't find words for. Yes to the partnership. Yes to the future. Yes to building something beautiful together, both professionally and personally. Yes to all of it. "Is that a yes?" Claire asked when they finally broke apart, both of them laughing. "That's a hell yes," Evan said. They told the team at the next company meeting, and the applause was thunderous. Thomas Marlowe stood up and raised his coffee cup in a toast. "To Evan Pierce, who proves that sometimes second chances are really just first chances that took the scenic route." After work, Evan picked up Mira from Mrs. Chen's apartment and sat her down for a serious conversation. They went to their spot, the diner 2 blocks from her old school, the one where they used to have Friday morning breakfast when everything was hard and uncertain. "I need to talk to you about some changes," Evan started, and Mira's eyes went wide. "Good changes or bad changes?" "Good ones. Really good ones." He took a breath. "The firm offered me a partnership. That means I'll be part owner, with my name on the company. It also means more money, enough that we can move to a better apartment, and I can afford those art lessons you've been wanting." Mira's face lit up. "Dad, that's amazing." "There's more," Evan continued. "Claire and I have been talking about what comes next for us. We're not rushing into anything, but we both see a future together. Eventually, that might mean combining our families. Would you be okay with that? With Claire and Liam becoming part of our lives permanently?" Mira pretended to think about it, but she was grinning too hard to pull off serious consideration. "Would I get my own room?" "In a bigger place, yes." "And would Liam be like my brother?" "Something like that." "And you'd be happy? Like really, actually happy? Not just okay, but happy?" Evan felt his throat tighten. "Yeah, baby. I'd be really, actually happy." "Then yes," Mira said firmly. 1,000 times yes. You deserve to be happy, Dad. You've spent so long taking care of me and making sure I was okay. It's time someone took care of you too." "When did you get so wise?" Evan asked, the same question he seemed to ask her every week. "I keep telling you, I've always been wise. You're just finally starting to listen." 3 months after that rainstorm, after the flood that had changed everything, Evan stood in the conference room of Dalton and Moore presenting the final phase designs for the Riverside District development. The Planning Commission was impressed. The client was thrilled. His team had worked seamlessly to create something truly special, architecture that served people, that built community, that would stand for generations. In the front row, Claire watched him with pride and love written all over her face. Beside her sat Liam and Mira, the kids having begged to come see Dad's big presentation. They were holding hands, these 2 children who'd found friendship in the aftermath of trauma, who'd helped their parents find their way back to life. When the presentation ended and the applause began, Evan caught Claire's eye across the room. She mouthed 2 words. "You did it." But Evan knew the truth. They'd done it, together. Through crisis and courage and the willingness to try door handles even when they seemed locked. Through second chances and new beginnings, and the understanding that sometimes the worst storms cleared the path to the best destinations. After the meeting, as people milled around congratulating the team, Thomas Marlowe pulled Evan aside one more time. "You know what the difference is," the old engineer said, "between who you were 5 years ago and who you are now." "What's that?" 5 years ago, you were talented but hungry. You worked hard because you wanted to prove something. Now you work hard because you love the work, because you know what it means to lose it, and you're grateful every day that you get to do it." Thomas smiled. "That's what makes you exceptional now. Not just the skills, the appreciation." That evening, all 4 of them, Evan, Claire, Mira, and Liam, went to dinner at a nice restaurant downtown to celebrate. They sat at a table by the window overlooking the city, talking and laughing and planning the future. Mira showed Liam her sketches for a painting she wanted to do, and Claire's hand found Evan's under the table, their fingers interlacing in that natural way they'd developed. "I have an announcement," Claire said during dessert. All 3 heads turned to her. "I've been thinking about the firm's name. Dalton and Moore doesn't really reflect who we are anymore. Marcus is long gone, and we've built something new, something better." She looked at Evan. "I'd like to change it, if you're okay with it." "Change it to what?" Evan asked. "Dalton and Pierce," Claire said simply. "Equal partners, equal voice, building the future together." Evan felt emotion well up in his chest. His name, on the firm, next to hers. It was more than he'd ever dreamed possible that day he'd stood in the rain watching his career wash away. "I'd be honored," he managed. "Can we help with the sign?" Liam asked excitedly. "When you change the name, can Mira and I help paint it or something?" "I think that can be arranged," Claire said, laughing. Later, after they dropped the kids at Mrs. Chen's for a sleepover, a regular occurrence now that had the older woman delighted to have 2 children to spoil, Evan and Claire sat on her porch watching the sun set over the city. The same porch where he'd stood weeks ago, dripping and bleeding and terrified, accepting her offer not knowing where it would lead. "Do you ever think about that day?" Claire asked softly. "The flood?" "Every day," Evan admitted. "How could I not? It changed everything." "Do you regret it? Jumping in? You could have been killed." Evan thought about it, really thought about it. The terror of the water, the weight of Liam in his arms, the moment when he'd looked up and seen Claire's face, the chain of events that had followed, leading them here. "No," he said finally. "I don't regret it, because that moment, that choice, it led to everything else. It gave me my life back. It gave us this." He gestured between them. "If I hadn't been there that day, if I hadn't jumped in, none of this would have happened." "Maybe it would have," Claire said. "Maybe we would have found our way back to each other eventually. Maybe, but I'm glad we didn't have to wait." Evan pulled her closer. "I'm glad the flood brought us together, even though it was terrifying and awful and could have ended so much worse. I'm glad." "Me too," Claire whispered, resting her head on his shoulder. "Me too." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky darkened and stars began to appear. Inside the house, through the window, they could see the living room where just weeks ago Evan had stood bleeding and uncertain, where Claire had told him the truth about knowing his sacrifice, where they'd started the painful, beautiful process of healing old wounds and building something new. "I've been thinking," Claire said after a while, "about us, about the future, about what we're building. And I think I'm ready to make it official. Not marriage, not yet, but moving in together, combining our families properly, making this real and permanent." She turned to look at him. "What do you think?" Evan's heart soared. "I think Mira would be thrilled. I think Liam would love having a sister. And I think—" He cupped her face gently. "I think I want to build a life with you, Claire Dalton, in every way possible. Even though we're breaking all the rules about dating your business partner, especially because we're breaking the rules. We've never been good at following the expected path anyway." She kissed him, long and slow and full of promise, and Evan thought about how far they'd both come. From that mahogany desk 5 years ago, where she'd fired him, to this porch where they were planning a future. From drowning to swimming, to finally finding solid ground. 6 months later, Dalton and Pierce Architects officially launched with a ceremony attended by the entire team, their families, and even Mrs. Chen, who'd appointed herself grandmother to all four of them. The new sign was beautiful, brushed steel with their names side by side, equal billing, equal partnership. Mira and Liam had indeed helped with the installation, mostly by providing enthusiastic commentary and getting in the way, but their presence had made it perfect. The Riverside District development broke ground that same week, with Evan and Claire standing side by side at the ceremony, hard hats on, shovels in hand, ready to build something that would last. The community center Evan had sketched on a pizza receipt was included in the final plans, his design refined and improved, but still recognizably his vision. When the mayor asked who'd conceptualized it, Claire had pushed Evan forward without hesitation. "This is the heart of the project," Evan had told the assembled crowd, his voice steady and sure. "A space where community happens, where people gather, where lives intersect. That's what good architecture does. It creates possibilities for human connection." After the ceremony, as they were leaving the site, a man approached them. He was probably in his early 30s, carrying a toddler and holding the hand of a slightly older child. "Excuse me," he said. "Are you Evan Pierce?" "I am," Evan said, unsure where this was going. "I just wanted to say thank you. I was stuck in my car during that flood 6 months ago, the one where you saved that boy. I watched you go into that water without hesitation, and it inspired me to get out and help others who were trapped. You saved more than just one life that day. You showed all of us what courage looks like." The man shook Evan's hand and walked away, leaving him standing there somewhat stunned. Claire squeezed his arm. "You never told me there were other people around," she said. "I didn't really notice," Evan admitted. "I just saw Liam. Everything else disappeared." "That's what makes it heroic," Claire said softly. "You didn't think about whether anyone was watching or what it would cost you. You just did what needed doing." That night, in the apartment they'd started sharing, a bigger place with room for all four of them, in a better neighborhood with good schools, Evan tucked both kids into their beds. Liam's room was decorated with superhero posters and model buildings. Mira's was a riot of color and art supplies, and the glow-in-the-dark stars they'd transferred from her old room. "Dad?" Mira said as he was turning out her light. "Are you happy?" It was the same question she'd asked months ago, but now the answer was different, complete. "Sure. Yeah, baby. I'm really, truly happy. For the first time in a long time, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." "Good," Mira said, smiling sleepily. "You deserve to be happy. You're my hero, you know, not because you saved Liam, but because you never gave up. Even when things were really hard, you kept going. That's the bravest thing anyone can do." Evan kissed her forehead, turned out the light, and stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her settle into sleep. Down the hall, he could hear Claire reading to Liam, their voices a gentle murmur through the walls. This house full of life and love and laughter, this family they were building from the wreckage of their separate pasts. He thought about that storm, about the moment he'd jumped into the flood without thinking, without hesitation, how terrified he'd been, how certain he might not make it, how the water had tried to drag them both under, but he'd fought it, had refused to let go, had somehow found the strength to reach solid ground. That's what the last 5 years had been, too. Fighting the current, refusing to let go, swimming towards solid ground, even when he couldn't see the shore. And now, finally, he was standing on it, feet planted, steady, home. Claire appeared beside him in the hallway, sliding her arm around his waist. "What are you thinking about?" "Second chances," Evan said, "and how sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can become the best thing, if you're brave enough to keep swimming." "We kept swimming," Claire said, "both of us. Through different floods, but we kept going, and we found each other on the other side." "Actually," Evan corrected gently, "you came running through that flood to find me. You always did have terrible timing." Claire laughed, swatting his arm. "My timing was perfect. I brought you back to life." "You did," Evan agreed, pulling her close. You really did.
Gichites.
They stood there in the hallway of their home, their children sleeping peacefully in rooms down the hall, their future stretching out ahead of them, bright and solid and real. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm, people living and loving and surviving and sometimes, if they were very lucky, finding their way home through the storm. And somewhere in that city, in an office building on the corner of 5th and Morrison, a sign glowed in the darkness. Dalton and Pierce Architects. 2 names, 2 stories, one future built on the foundation of second chances, hard-won wisdom, and the understanding that sometimes you have to lose everything to find what really matters. The flood had come and gone, but what it left behind, what it had washed clean and made new, that would last forever.